Greetings and welcome to Maisha Kazini. We are here with David Hundeyin, who we are pleased to host for the second time. And today we are going to talk about the knowledge ecosystem in Africa and how that is connected to our position as a continent in global politics. Welcome, David.
Thank you for having me.
I'm glad to have you. I just want to say how important your work is for me because it emboldens me, it makes me realize I'm not insane. Yeah. So our conversation today is something about sort of this middle layer of Africans, people who have been educated, and how they function in the political economy of Africa and even in the global economy. So I wanted to start by asking you, this is a term that I heard from you first. What is epistemic warfare and why did you use it in characterizing Africa's?
This was something that I erroneously used to refer to using the blanket term information warfare. What I came to understand is that information warfare is just the second layer of this, that there's something deeper and more underlying. So the idea behind information warfare is that the information that is fed to a population is strategically slanted or bent in such a way as to produce certain outcomes. Now, epistemic warfare is a deeper layer than that. Epistemic warfare is basically a war on the very framework of knowledge itself. So it's a way of influencing how people take in and process the world, which is a lot more powerful than simply influencing the information that they receive. Now, if I'm receiving slanted information, but I have a mindset that allows me to filter that information, to understand where it's coming from and what bias it has, and how I'm to use that information, then the intentions of the person sending me that information might not be accomplished. But if that person is able to influence how I think and how I view the world, how I take in information, how I perceive of knowledge, then that person basically, that's the closest thing that exists to mind control. And that's pretty much what has been done. So um, I'll use formal education as a case in point. The academic process, the research process, which is the process by which what is accepted as knowledge is established, right? The very process makes it such that only certain types of knowledge or information can possibly come out of that process. So, say, let me use the healthcare industry as an example. A lot of the groundbreaking studies and trials and research efforts tend to be funded by the so-called big pharma, right? Especially if there's no state that is stepping in to plug that funding gap, it's the private sector that does it, and obviously they're doing it for profit. Now, what that will mean is that there's a specific type of outcome that the pharmaceutical companies are looking for, which if the research doesn't produce that outcome, then it's likely to lose its funding. So if, for example, someone is, and I'm not saying this is the case, this is just an example I'm just pulling out of thin air, right? So if a pharmaceutical company has a product which is supposed to, let me say, it's supposed to cure brain cancer, right? It's this miracle drug that cures brain cancer, supposedly, or reverses Alzheimer's or something. And then there's a researcher somewhere who is on the payroll of this pharmaceutical company who is trying to do some research to establish that, in fact, this supposed wonder drug actually results in total loss of sexual function, let's just say, right? Even if the thing that he's trying to prove is actually true, and even if his research actually holds up, using the scientific method, because clashes with the profit orientation, the profit motive of his funder, that research will never see the light of day. So the fact that the research itself might be correct, and the fact that that knowledge would have serious implications for the public has no bearing on what is accepted in public as the knowledge, the information that is out there. In other words, just the fact of having a scientific method in and of itself does not guarantee that the outcomes, the information outcomes, the knowledge outcomes will be scientific, because there is a gatekeeper who is profit oriented or who has some other motive for only letting certain types of knowledge even exist, right? That's a very tiny example of how epistemic warfare works, where the entire framework of knowledge in a field is slanted in such a way that only certain types of information can be produced. And that even for the recipients of the information, which is another type of epistemic warfare, the way you even perceive and take in information can only lead to a certain outcome. Let me use religion as another example of epistemic warfare. Now, I was raised in a religious cult. My family were Jehovah's Witnesses, right? And one of the things I remember very clearly through my childhood was having this message consistently drummed into my head that one must accept the doctrines from the so-called governing body who supposedly speak directly to Jehovah. And you must do so with full submission. You must never push back. You must never ask too many questions. There is a, so I think I was like 11 or 12 years old. I remember this very clearly, sitting down in a Jehovah's Witness meeting and studying one of those publications, like a question and answer session. And the title of the article was "Beware of the Trap of Independent Thinking." Like that was literally the title. Beware of the trap of independent thinking, right? Because the whole thing was follow, do as you're told. So, existing within that framework where you have had this drummed into your head for years that this is the indisputable word of God, right? So, whatever you hear from here, you swallow it whole. You don't ask any questions, bones and all. Now, if someone were to meet a Jehovah's Witness and show them information which clashes with the programming they've received, that this is the indisputable, this organization is the truth, as they call it, the Jehovah's Witness is going to dismiss it out of hand. Instantly, that's going to be the reaction. And I know this because I witnessed this so many times. They will just dismiss it out of hand. It doesn't matter whether you get a signed confession from the governing body itself, saying that everything we've said has been a lie, we've pulled it out of thin air, the purpose of this is to control you and to extract from you. It doesn't matter. Because by that point, the very mental architecture through which they perceive the world has been molded in such a way that it's impossible for them to take in certain kinds of information. So the information just bounces off their head. So I remember when I think I was maybe 17 or 18, at this point already, because I was fortunate enough to have had a lot of access to reading material outside of the cult. So I had already sort of deprogrammed myself at this point. I was one of the very, very, very fortunate few who was able to do that. And I was having a conversation with someone who was still inside, very much, still lost in the source. And I showed him a reference from a JW publication from the early 1970s, where they put in print their prediction that the end of the world, the so-called Armageddon, was going to happen in 1975, right? And we're having this conversation in 2008, right? So clearly the world didn't end in 1975. So, what's the explanation for that? And I remember the exact reaction from the person. It was just everything I just said, just literally bounced off his head.
Yeah.
Like his brain just chose not to process what I said, even though I showed him a reference, because when I first said it, he claimed I was lying, that's not possible. Then I told him that they made the claim in print. He said, that's not true, that's not possible. And then I showed him the actual reference that this is it. And his brain just couldn't process it. And he just basically walked away from it. And he's still in the organization to date as we speak. That's what the epistemic warfare does. It attacks the framework that knowledge is produced from, and it attacks the mental architecture through which people take in knowledge, which makes it a very dangerous thing.
And you told me in that conversation, you said that you feel that Africa is the lab for this kind. I mean, what made you? Because when you look at the US, for example, the you can see these guys are so propagandized. So
Yes, so why I specifically referenced Africa as lab rats is
yeah,
not because Africa is it's not because Africans are more gullible than anybody else or anything like
yes,
that, but
yeah,
it's because Africa is the, I guess, as the continent that historically has had the least external ambition in terms of creating empires, right? So as a result of that, it's the continent which has never really built the frameworks to mentally and intellectually dominate the rest of the world. So even within Africa, although obviously there were empires within Africa, but to a very large extent, the animating ideal across the continent this is the pre-colonial era, was basically live and let live, right? So which is why you would have maybe 5 or 6 thousand different ethnic groups and languages on one continent, right? There was no Genghis Khan on a huge mission to
mm,
unify everything with violence or anything. That simply didn't happen. So as a result of that, pretty much every other super cluster of humanity has some sort of framework through which it explains the world and through which it receives the world. Africa is the only supercluster which has had to receive the story of the world through someone else's filter, through someone else's lens, without its own lens, which is what
mm,
colonialism was.
yeah,
Basically, a story was forced on you. Yeah, you didn't really get a say in how to process it and whether to accept it or not.
mm,
The story was forced on you in different ways. It was forced on you through your religion, which was, the actual process of morphing African society from the pre-colonial society to the colonial society. In some cases, it took place in like 20 years, very, very fast. Yesterday you were this, today you were that, and you didn't really get to say in it. Your religion has changed, the language you speak has changed. Even our indigenous languages have changed as a result of that exposure. What you know as your culture has completely changed. Your economy has irreversibly changed.
mm,
Your entire framework for understanding the world no longer makes sense. So you then have to adopt someone else's framework for understanding the world,
yes,
for the world to
yeah,
still make sense to you.
mm,
So what that has done is that we
mm,
are basically the group of people who have the least mental defenses on the
yes,
planet, and the group of people who still do not have any superstructure for telling our own story and receiving the story from the rest of the world. So we receive whatever the world gives us. There's no fence, there's no barrier, there's no filter,
yeah,
and what we put out to the rest of the world is pretty much what the rest of the world wants us to put out. We don't have that sort of that sense of agency that this is how we must control our knowledge space, our information space, our information economy, whatever you call it. There is no sense of that sort of shared destiny, that shared identity that this is something we have that we must protect. It doesn't exist. So what that then leads to is a situation where, be it religion, be it formal education, be it economics, be it even sport, everyone is free to come in and
yeah,
do as they please.
yeah,
So our educational systems, it wasn't you I was having this conversation with, but across most of Africa, modern day Africa, most formal government mandated educational systems still teach that there's something called advantages of colonialism.
yeah. Even
Right?
here,
Now,
there's some people who
yeah,
still experience that.
yeah, it's a thing. Now, there is no way that an African who has even a vague understanding of African 19th and 20th century history will think of colonialism as a positive. in any way, right? But the point is that that knowledge ecosystem is not an African one.
Yeah.
It's someone else's knowledge ecosystem, and which just happens to be in Africa. So in a sense, we've become shells. We wear African skin, we speak African languages, we wear, to an extent anyway, we wear African, we perform being African, but psychologically, the Africa that existed in the maybe 15 or 1600s, the African no longer exists. We're basically this thing that has been created in someone else's lab. If we're trying to find our way back to who we actually are and find a way to merge that identity of who we once were with who we should be to create an approximation of a successful African identity in the 21st century, we need to create a new paradigm for what knowledge is, for how to receive knowledge. We need to basically put up gates and fences psychologically, right? Currently, we don't have that. Currently, anything the world tells us, we believe it. Currently, it's so bad that even in the news ecosystem, if something happens right here on the continent in front of the local media, it's what CNN reports that the local media will carry.
Yes.
That happens all the time. So that's what I mean when I say Africans are basically lab rats. That our entire knowledge and information ecosystem, our entire culture and religion, like our entire sense of identity, everything that makes us who we think we are, is not really under our control. I think we're the only group of people who that can be said of.
I've just remembered I didn't want to lose this point. These advantages and disadvantages. It's a way in which Africans have been trained to think that everything must have a good side and a bad side. So the idea of, we can say, we are dismissing colonialism as damaging and there's no discussion of it. At least in Kenya, what will be said is, no, let's be objective. Let's look at the facts. So that, and I didn't think about it until a week ago when these women politicians, these days they are weaponizing women against African societies. These women politicians, in the tradition of what's happening in South Africa, they decided to say, oh yeah, we have too many Burundians doing work here. So
I saw that.
Yeah, so if they don't want, and they've not said anything, but these women were saying, if you don't like it, go away. These people have not said anything. But within 2 days, somebody was saying, let's look at this objectively. Maybe they have a point. And what was actually a political statement is now reduced to an academic one. What are the pros and cons? Let's look at this objectively. And we Africans are expected to look at ideas like that objectively. So it's part of that ecosystem you're saying. There's a way in which Africans don't have a bottom line, which they're like,
exactly.
No, this one you can't cross.
Exactly.
Like, justify colonialism, I'm not having that conversation.
Exactly.
You can call me opinionated, not open, and you see they pull out these accusations. You're not objective. Exactly. Why aren't you embracing critical thinking?
You have a victim mentality.
Yes.
Why don't you take responsibility instead of trying to blame XYZ for blah blah blah? Again, we're the only group of people on the planet who think that having that baseline, having those red lines that cannot be crossed, is somehow an intellectual, is some sort of moral failure. That to be intellectually objective or to be an intellectual, absolutely everything needs to be on the table all the time.
Yes.
Somebody who clearly has an agenda can come and say, "Are Africans monkeys?" And then you have to sit down and debate it. Am I a monkey? Meanwhile, the person who brought that so-called debate to the table knows why he did that. It's because that's the level of conversation he wants you to have. He wants to keep you stuck at debating your basic humanity. And even if you debate excellently and you win the debate, there will always be another one. And you're never going to leave that realm of debate. So it's what you said earlier about this lack of understanding that ideas are not neutral. Everything has an agenda. So if a few weeks ago when I was in Tanzania, I was speaking at a press conference with Joshua Maponga. That was a point I was very eager to put across, that there is no form of information dispersal that is neutral anywhere on the planet. Everything has its agenda, absolutely everything. There is no media platform, there's no academic journal that everything, all the information presented is just information for the sake of itself. Scientifically accurate information developed using the scientific method for the sake of nothing other than adding to the bank of human knowledge. That doesn't exist. Everything has an agenda, including me.
Yes.
That's the reality that humanity exists with. But for some reason, we have been indoctrinated to think that the very notion and concept of something being an idea makes it valid for discussion. I personally get a lot of flack for this when a lot of the time when I'm engaging with people like on social media, for example, and I make the subjective decision that conversation with this individual doesn't accomplish anything because this individual is disingenuous and I'm going to block this person. I do not see the benefit in having this conversation. There's, oh, you're intolerant of opposing viewpoints, you blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, this is not an opposing viewpoint.
You're not respecting their human right to expression. That's another
exactly.
one.
Exactly. And you can draw a straight line from that to the political space, which is where this gets very important. Where, say, a country which is trying to come out of its colonial experience, it's trying to improve the material conditions of its people, it's trying to build infrastructure, it's trying to gain economic sovereignty. In the process of doing that, entities which benefit from that country remaining debased will then come in some way, shape, or form, be it through some NGO, civil society, journalists, whatever, and say, hey, some of these moves that are being made for the ultimate benefit, wider benefit of the people, they're not in the interest of press freedom or human rights or something or the other. And then this becomes a whole thing. So up to today, here in Ghana, for example, there is still a debate over the issue, was Kwame Nkrumah a dictator?
What?
Right. And the reason there is still that debate is because apparently during the period where there were several attempts on his life when he was the president. If you recall, the first ever terror attack in West Africa was here in Ghana. There was a bombing which was targeted at him, but he didn't die, and a bunch of people got injured or whatnot. So as a result of all these incidents, he introduced something called the Preventive Detention Act, which is that people who are known to be in constant contact with the US and UK embassy and high commission, who were known to be actively trying to foment rebellion or a coup or something, people who were a danger to the national security of this newly independent African country, that they could be detained even without the conventional, trial and whatnot. They were known to be in contact with foreign intelligence agencies. Now, you may not have the hard evidence that they are plotting a coup or they are plotting to assassinate the president, but it is known that these people, even before independence, these are the same people who wrote a letter to the Queen of England begging her not to grant Ghana independence. Frontline political actors, people like J.B. Dankwa. So he introduced Preventive Detention Act, which, and a lot of them got locked up in jail. And it actually worked because those constant terror attacks and assassination attempts actually, fell off a cliff after this happened. However, then it now became a whole conversation. Oh, he's a despot. He's locking people up without trial and this and that. So the wider point, which is that the country needs to move forward. The country is trying to move away from its colonial experience. It's trying to industrialize. It's trying to improve the material conditions of the generality of the people. And that this small minority are messing it up for everybody because they are so attached to their colonial master. But that point is lost. And it then becomes an academic conversation about why should people be locked up without trial? Why is press freedom being throttled? So we start having this completely abstract conversation, which is obviously in the interest of people who would like us to remain a certain way, right? It's the same thing going on in the Sahel now, where instead of having the conversation that actually matters, Are the material conditions of people there getting better? Are people who didn't have access to basic medical facilities 5 years ago now able to have a kidney transplant in their own country? Are people who lived 300 kilometers away from the nearest healthcare facility 4 years ago now having clinics in their village? Right? Those are the important questions. Are people who didn't have access to an all-weather road now 5 minutes away from an all-weather road? Are they able to transport their goods more efficiently and quicker now? Are people who used to have to buy 3 or 4 SIM cards when moving borders now able to use one SIM card across 3 national territories? All of these are true, by the way. But that's not the conversation anyone is having. The material conditions of people living in the Sahel are, significantly better for the most part than just 3 or 4 years ago. So things are clearly moving in the right direction, right? But nobody's having that conversation. We're having conversations about, is Ibrahim Traore a dictator? Is Assimi Goita clamping down on press freedom? Is Abdurrahman Chiani going after NGO and civil society, stifling the civic space? And we're having conversations which are diametrically opposed to our own material interests because we have been indoctrinated to think every conversation is valid all the time.
In the same way.
So exactly. If I have a knife at your neck and you have the opportunity, like I'm actively trying to kill you, and you have the opportunity to bash my head in with a stone, which is obviously in self-defense, at the point where you're about to bash my head, I am then entitled to start asking you, don't you think you are a murderer?
Right.
Exactly. And then we must have a debate. It must be a conversation. Everyone is always constantly entitled to a debate 100% of the time, which is absolute nonsense. It's not true, but that's what we've been indoctrinated to think.
That's what I was telling you. That's a conversation that's very hard for Kenyans to have because of our history. Our country just decided to go on the capitalist path, suppressed any questioning of socialism, assassinated. The first assassination was of a politician who was trying to set up an institute, the Lumumba Institute, to retrain Kenyan civil servants to think differently. So I don't know. How would you tease that out? Because you see, like now, those people who were trying to pursue that orientation and to say Kenya must change its economic logic, they were detained and assassinated. And this with the help of the CIA and the British. So yeah, how do you tease that out as opposed to somebody like Sekou Toure or Kwame Nkrumah, who were directly in the line of fire of empire?
To be honest, I always feel as if countries like Kenya were a bit unfortunate through no real fault of their own. I think just for the simple fact that Kenya had or has a climate that made it possible for settler colonialism to be a thing.
Yeah.
It was always going to be difficult to properly decolonize because the colonizers were never really going to physically leave.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, they did leave in numbers, but a significant minority remained, and they still remain very powerful, even after the country supposedly got its independence. I was surprised to find out last year that I think Kenya gained independence 1964, was it?
Yeah, we got proper independence was 64, but we got self-government in 63. Yeah, so that's a confusion that we have.
Yeah. So independence comes 1964, and then I think 6 months after the supposed independence, the British opened their largest overseas military base in the world.
Yeah.
I was very surprised to find this out last year because, to my mind, there was only one very obvious conclusion to be drawn from that. That military base it's an occupation.
Yes.
They basically occupied Kenya 6 months after supposedly. I don't know why I was never taught this when I was growing up. I just discovered this last year. But the Batuk military base in UK is the largest overseas UK military base on the planet. I think from that point of view, it was clear that Kenya was never really going to be allowed to have a proper attempt at like Ghanaian style decolonization.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, Kenya was just too important to be allowed to drift away. And I think that has percolated into many aspects of the modern Kenyan psyche.
Yeah.
I always say that I enjoy spending time in Kenya. I I like the Kenyan people, but it's always very interesting to experience Kenyan so-called knowledge spaces, be it in academia, be it in media and journalism, which is the space I exist in, be it in civil society and other adjacent spaces. It's always very important to experience Kenyan psyche in these spaces because I would say the main difference between the Kenyan psyche and the classic West African psyche, modern West African psyche, is that the modern West African psyche simply doesn't know. So the Kwame Nkrumah and Sekou Toure generation, to us, those are aliens from another world. It's like we have this weird time dilation where everything that happened between the 1950s and 1970s and everything that happened from 1980 onward is like there's a wall, there's a historical wall, and we just anything that happened before that threshold doesn't exist. And here in Ghana, for example, there is not a single. Kwame Nkrumah wrote several books, and he's obviously the most influential figure in the country's history. Yet, I can tell you this for free: if you go to any major bookshop here in Accra, you will not find a single one of Kwame Nkrumah's books anywhere. You simply won't find. I know there's one bookshop in Accra where you might find some of his titles, but it's like a very obscure sort of niche thing. All the major bookshops you find it, you do not see a single one of Kwame Nkrumah's books anywhere. His famous book, Colonialism, the last stage of imperialism, is not in print here. Your best bet for getting it is to find a PDF on the internet. It's not available in print here. None of his books are on any academic syllabus in Ghana, not one. So even to Ghanaians, if you ask a Ghanaian why is Kwame Nkrumah such an important figure in your country's history, the modern Ghanaians, say born in 2005, they can't give you an answer. They don't know. They have no idea. They just know that they grew up hearing the name and, oh yeah, he's our founding father. Okay, he was a founding father. What did that mean in practice? Oh, he was our head of state when we gained independence. Okay, and what did he do? Like, why was he that much of a colossus? They have no idea. The name Kwame Nkrumah is as distant from a modern day Ghanaian as Jomo Kenyatta is to a Ghanaian. They're just two names hanging in the air. There's no context to them. So that's the West African psyche. We're simply ignorant. We just don't know our own, even fairly recent history. We just don't know. Now, the Kenyan psyche is a bit different. It's not as ignorant. However, instead of simply not knowing, it knows the wrong thing. The Kenyan psyche would tell you that Jomo Kenyatta wasn't really an independence hero, which is true. I mean, he was a collaborator of the British. They'll tell you that openly. However, having heard that, you will then expect to hear, okay, who is the real national? Who do you consider to be the real independence hero, or what political direction do you think the country will be taking? And then you just start hearing a whole lot of NGO civil society soundbite stuff. Then you start hearing talk about how, if you ask the Kenyan what's the problem with Kenya, they'll tell you
corruption.
The leaders don't follow the constitution.
Yes. Yeah.
As if the constitution in and of itself is almost like a holy Bible, where if you read and follow its dictates, you will be saved. No one is asking the questions, what helps my material interest as an indigenous human being in this part of the world? It's all about these processes and documents and institutions which sort of exist hanging in the air. If you had asked, because I've had this conversation several times with several Kenyans. Why do you dislike William Ruto? For the record, I absolutely don't like William Ruto either. But dig an inch beneath the surface. Why exactly are you so angry with William Ruto? Why do you think he should leave after one term? I agree he should leave after one term, but why do you specifically think he should leave after one term? You just hear a lot of bluster. Oh, the goons go around killing people, which they do. That's no one is disputing that. But what is the political and economic rationale that you have in your mind? They can't really answer. I can't tell you the number of people in Kenya that I've met who it has been news to them that the the 2024 uprising, that the IMF has predicted it 6 months in advance, and that this prediction is available in writing.
Yeah, it was even in the newspaper. I'm surprised they didn't see it. It's in the papers.
It is news to so many people.
What?
To date, it's news to so many people that what happened in 2024 was actually forecasted more than 6 months in advance. The IMF said in its country advisory to Kenya that these proposals will likely lead to civil unrest, and the recommendation was push them through anyway.
It's in the newspaper. That's where I saw it. So anyway,
exactly. So
I don't understand.
You can have. I find this very interesting about Kenyans. You can have a whole what sounds like a rich political conversation with a Kenyan in a way that you can't have with a West African, because he simply doesn't know what he doesn't know. But you just find out that beneath what sounds like erudition, beneath what sounds like they know what they're talking about, they know absolutely nothing. So there's a much bigger veneer of intellectualism in Kenya than in Nigeria or in Ghana. But dig 1 inch beneath the surface, and all Africans basically exist almost at the same intellectual level.
And that explains why Kenyans seem to mesmerize the rest of the continent. When I try to explain, no, Kenyans are very conservative. They have a very limited knowledge. People are like, Kenya, how? Because we are very loud. We're very loud continentally.
And also know how to present in a way that can be very impressive. So
yes,
I remember last month I have a team member at the Spearhead, who's a Ghanaian, who when we're doing the premiere in Nairobi, I think you met him, the big guy, Jesh.
Yeah.
And I think this was his first time leaving Ghana. So I think he has only ever heard about Kenya, and this was his first time visiting, and he was just absolutely blown away. The way like the CBD in Nairobi looks like this big, impressive city. It's so much bigger than Accra, by the way. Like so much bigger. Accra has like 2 million people. Nairobi is approaching 5 million.
Yeah.
And then like just visually, it's so spectacular compared to Accra. And he was just absolutely blown away. I remember we were going up to the roof of the Sarit Center, and he was like, I'm in another universe here. Like, so he obviously would go home, and the impression he has taken away from Kenya is that these guys are on a different level. Kenya has that effect on the rest of the continent. But after you've been there 2 or 3 times and you get used to the bling bling, and then you start to interact with the people and stop focusing on the 30-story buildings, right? You then realize that it's an impressive facade, very impressive one, I'll give you that, but it's a facade. And that even materially speaking, the vast majority of Kenyans are not involved in what looks like that prospering Nairobi economy. They're completely excluded from it.
And there's a huge amount of violence that is used to ensure that stays like that. It always surprises. I mean, I know I shouldn't be surprised, but I get surprised by the level of violence, how daily it is, and intimate and ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Yeah. Okay. I wanted to sort of now go to the conversation, especially the one you had on Connect Africa, because you said some things about the differences between French and English colonialism and what it has done to the way we look at life. I don't know, especially now, given what you've said about Kenya, which I don't know whether you see some elements of it in South Africa. South Africa feels very familiar. It feels very familiar. But yeah, you can either start from the South African angle or the French Francophone one.
Well, I'll start from the Francophone one because that one is very, very close. It's next door. Ghana is surrounded on all sides by Francophone countries. When the French colonized the global South, but Africa specifically, one very devious thing that they did, which was kind of different to the strategy employed by the British, but a bit similar to that employed by the Portuguese, was that they, instead of instituting a simple racial class system like the British did, where you are black, you are an African, you're a native, and the most you can ever be is like an approved native. That's all. You can never rise into the British class. It's just impossible, full stop. Right. Unlike the British, the French created this system where it was possible for you to aspire to become a black Frenchman, where they tried to convince you that their colonial mission was not primarily based around extraction, but it was based around civilization.
Mm-hmm.
The British made very little attempt to hide. We're here to take from you. We're superior to you. We don't think you're a human being. You are just here to dig out stuff from the earth for us. And if you complain, we'll kill you. Simple. It was very British. You knew what it was very simple. You knew what the deal was. In Nigeria, for example, in Lagos, in a place called Ikorodu, which is like a suburb of Lagos, like 50 kilometers away from the CBD. And I remember hearing this story from an indigene that back in the I think this was 1941 or 42, there was no road linking Ikorodu to Lagos. So people had to use boats and ferries, right? And there were lots of accidents. People used to die a lot of the time. So after a significant ferry accident where I think 80 people died in the early 1940s, they then went to meet the governor of Lagos. He was a British colonial officer, right? And they basically said, we need a road so that people can stop dying when they're trying to move between Lagos and Ikorodu. And this guy looked them dead in the eye and said, I'm not here to give you roads. I'm here to serve the Queen of England. Wow. So basically, your palm oil, your rubber quota, go do those things and stop asking me for a road. That was the British colonial system. They made it very clear to you where you stood. Now, the French, they were not better than the British, but they were more devious, in my opinion, because instead of making it clear and obvious to you what the deal was, which would then make it very clear to you that for you to be a human being, you needed to rebel. What the French rather did was that they gave you this illusion of inclusion, right? So the British said that they considered your language to be rubbish, your art is inferior, your music is ooga booga nonsense. The French, however, would take your djembe drum to Paris. They would take your cultural troops. They would make you feel as though they feel enriched by your culture and your presence, and that somehow you are part of this larger, global French civilization, right? And they did this in Africa, they did this in Martinique, they attempted to do it in Vietnam. The Vietnamese obviously were they were not the kind to go for that. Good for them. But this project was very successful, particularly in West and Central Africa, because up till today, if you go to Dantopa, which is a place in Benin, you go to Grand Bassam, which is a suburb in Abidjan, and you speak English there, the immediate response you get is the same response you get when you go to Paris or Marseille and you speak English, right? The hostility you get is not a hostility that you are a foreigner. No, it's that you're an English speaking foreigner, you don't speak French. Because the guy in Dantopa and the guy in Grand Bassam thinks of himself as French in a similar kind of way that the guy in Paris or Marseille thinks of himself as French. And the guy in Abidjan thinks that till today it's a very common thing that what we call WAEC, that's the West African Examinations Council, our secondary school examination. The top performers in the French-speaking parts of West Africa instantly get scholarships. Like the French government does that, right? So even though like in the English-speaking parts, there are also like UK and US government scholarships, not government, but like the UK and US scholarships, but the process is a lot more indirect, and it's not like a given thing that every year the best performers will get taken away. Some years it happens, some years it doesn't. In the French-speaking part, the ambition of every parent is do very well on your exams so that they'll take you to France. Till today, that's a thing, right? And that's just one of the ways that the French incorporated this idea into the minds of their colonial subjects in this part of Africa, that you are a junior Frenchman and it's possible to earn your way into becoming a senior Frenchman, right? You start off being a junior Frenchman in Abidjan or in Cotonou, and then if you do well, if you're good enough at what you do, if you are good enough at your studies, or you sing well enough, or you dance well enough, you kick a ball well enough, you run well enough, you get taken to Paris, where you become an intermediate Frenchman. If you keep being excellent at what you do there, then you can eventually become rewarded with full Frenchhood, where in addition to citizenship, you can become a member of the French Assembly. You can, do this or that and the other.
And that the French Academy.
Exactly. That is, and it's, in my opinion, it's even worse nowadays, because for a kid growing up whether in West Africa or even in like the black suburbs of Paris, if you're a football fan, for example, and you put on the TV and you watch the French national team, it's 11 black players. I think the last game they played, they had 10 black players and 1 white player. But the first game at the World Cup, it was 11 black players. So it's possible for you to look at that and think it's true. It's possible for you to look at that and think, if I do well enough, they will integrate me. They do appreciate me. And that, they actually think of Kylian Mbappe as a Frenchman. Kylian Mbappe's father is from Cameroon. Or that so if he can do it, I can do it too. It's a very pervasive idea. So the net effect of that idea politically is that the political mindset needed to break down France-Afrique, right? France-Afrique, which is the political system governing 14 African countries, where in addition to the currency, people always talk about the currency, there are a lot of other things involved in France-Afrique. The academic syllabus of these countries is written in France, right? With the exception of the Sahelian Alliance, who have taken themselves out of this arrangement, the academic syllabus is written in France. The textbooks are printed in France or in Switzerland. I kid you not, right? These are not the textbooks used by French kids, but they're printed there, right? What else? The cultural ecosystem. So the arts, basically, they're basically an extension of the French Ministry of Culture. Everything is an offshoot. They get a budget from there. So basically, these 14 countries are not independent in any meaningful way. They're vassal states, with the exception of the Sahel Alliance. So if you think that it's possible for you to earn your way into being French, and that other people have done it, and that it happens all the time, then why would you feel like there's a political need to destroy France-Afrique? You think that the system works. So even though there is obviously especially over the past decade and a half, since internet access became a thing, and then people started having conversations about like Sankara and things like that, and there has been more of a political movement to get rid of France-Afrique, which has culminated in the Sahelian Alliance, and that is growing. But I think that the very logic of French imperialism is what has allowed it to last for this long without pushback. So, in my opinion, pushback that should have happened since the 1960s and 70s is what we're seeing today, is what's happening now. And I think that is why. Now, having said all of this is not to say that the British did us a favor.
No, they didn't.
They absolutely did not, because while arguably their style of colonialism made it easier for us to rebel. However, even within that rebellion, one very funny thing that we ended up doing was that we rebelled and in a way ended up trying to be like them.
Yes.
We didn't rebel against the intellectual notion of British society, the British class system, the British economic system. We didn't rebel against that. We just rebelled against the British oppression. That's what it was, that we don't want white men telling us what to do here in our land. That's it. Well, once they're not here, even if they're still dictating to us by proxy, that's fine. As long as we are not looking at a white man as our president or our governor, as long as the symbols of power you can see look like us, we're fine. As long as there's a new national bourgeoisie made up of people that look like us, we're fine. At least in West Africa, like the Anglophone part of West Africa. That's how we see things, right? We are not bothered about why is it that anytime someone wants to become a president in Nigeria, they have to go to Chatham House.
Chatham
They have to do
House.
the Chatham House in London every single time.
Yes.
Why?
Kenya,
We're not bothered about
same.
We're not bothered about that. That's perfectly fine. You know, whatever neo-colonial relationship exists, you know, that's for you and other conspiracy theorists. What I'm concerned about is that my president looks like me. My senator looks like me. My governor looks like me. All the symbols of power I can see look like me. Therefore,
I'm independent.
I'm independent. You know, it doesn't matter that my entire system and structure of governance, like in Kenya, is basically the British Westminster model. Pretty much. The only difference is that there's a president in Kenya. But even the terminology is the same. Minister of a member of parliament. It's the British Westminster system with the presidency tacked on top of it. You know, it doesn't matter. That's fine. We just reproduced the same colonial model that was imposed on us. That's fine. The colonial police that terrorized us are the same police that still exists today, and we never made any attempt to reimagine what a police is. That's fine. In fact, to the best of my knowledge, the only part of Anglophone Africa that actually made a meaningful attempt to decolonize systems and structures was actually Kwame Nkrumah's Ghana. And I'm going to stress Kwame Nkrumah's Ghana. Because as soon as he was ousted in 1966, it was frozen there.
Yeah.
It froze there. So the extent of decolonization that was accomplished by 1966 is where Ghana still is today. Right. So if you were ever to visit Ghana, one thing you would notice is that the culture of police here is very, very different to the culture of police in Kenya or Nigeria. It's very different. First of all, here in Ghana, the police, in Nigeria, we call our police the Nigeria Police Force. Here, it's the police service.
Kenya too. In Kenya as well.
Here, you don't see them carrying guns and moving around. They are armed, but you don't see them. Here, I think it happens maybe once every couple of years that you will hear that Ghanaian police shot someone.
Wow.
Dead.
We
it's
can't
not a
even
thing that
imagine that.
Not a thing that happened. But in Kenya or in Nigeria, it's Tuesday.
Yeah.
It's a daily occurrence.
Mm.
Right. So I will give Ghana that credit that some measure of decolonization was accomplished. Kwame Nkrumah was actually intentional about these things, that it's not just about a flag and an anthem. Systems need to be completely reimagined. But he wasn't given enough time. And he basically had 9 years, and that was it. In Nigeria or Kenya, on the other hand, or South Africa, which I think is even worse, completely different experience. Because first of all, I'm not even sure that I should classify South Africa as Anglophone. They don't like being classified as Anglophone, even though they are. Oh, they always claim we're not colonized by the British. Technically, I mean,
they have all the signs. Oh God, they do.
Oh, a few weeks ago, when I put out a tweet talking about the Big Five in Anglophone Africa, I mentioned Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, Tanzania, and South Africa. South Africans were my mentions. We're not part of Anglophone Africa. Yeah. So, I mean,
but that's the thing I wanted to say. Sorry to interrupt. There's a very aesthetic obsession with aesthetics among, sorry to say, the Anglophone world.
Yeah.
We don't want to be called certain names, but the way we function is exactly that.
Exactly. So they have all the hallmarks of classic Anglo colonization.
Yeah, they do.
Their class system is baked into the fabric of the country. In fact, theirs is worse because they literally had an apartheid system, which, I mean, I don't think it gets more blatant than that. And as I think we all know, what happened in 1994 was a visual reorganization. It was not a systemic reorganization at all.
Mm.
The economy, everything is still as lopsided as it was in 1991. You know, nothing has fundamentally changed. The only difference is you no longer need a dump pass to move around. Apart from that, it's the same thing. So that class system has not changed. Their system of policing is just as violent as it was. They still have massacres. I remember the most recent one, I think it was 2012, that I
Yeah,
recall. Marikana.
Marikana, yeah.
The way the civil service operates, where I had this experience in 2023 with the South African civil service, where I was invited to Cape Town to speak at a public event, an event which I'm happy I didn't get to speak at, by the way, because I didn't do my due diligence. It was the Atlas Foundation. I didn't really know who they were. You know, thank goodness that this didn't work out. But I was supposed to speak in Cape Town, and they basically, I wasn't able to obtain a visa because obviously as a refugee, I used a refugee passport, and the South African Department of International Relations and Cooperation apparently does not recognize refugee passports as passports. So I had to send an email to the ambassador in Ghana, and there was a whole back and forth and back. And long story short, by the time I finally got like the green light, said, okay, we're gonna make a special what's it called? I forget why English is it's a language that you forget at slightest convenience, but they're basically going to make a special allowance for me. This was 5 weeks after the event had passed. Right. So that's system of like extreme bureaucracy.
Yes. Yeah.
In another hallmark of classic Anglo civilization where
yeah.
there is really no need for things to move at snail's pace. There's really no need. But the system that we inherited stated that this has to move from this table to that table to the other table, and that everyone on those three tables are all at war with each other.
Yeah.
Everyone is trying to one up each other. Everyone is trying to justify their job and trying to upstage the next person. And the whole thing is just a snake pit, such that governance moves at snail's pace. And the very system and structure of governance makes governance impossible. That's a common denominator that all the Anglo states in Africa have. So no matter how well-intentioned the person at the top may or may not be, no matter how much budget is available, the very structure of governance itself maintains the material conditions of people exactly where they are. You know, and we don't realize that it's by design. So that's classic Anglo colonization. So as you said the other day, I don't think it's productive to rank which colonization was worse. I think they're both terrible in their own ways. But I think those are the major differences between the two. I mean, they're both psychological, but I think the French one attacked identity, while the British one attacked your system of thinking. So the French one made you unaware of the fact that being French and being African are incongruous. The British one attacked your ability to envision a world outside of the world that they gave to you.
That's really helpful, that clarification, because I kept wondering, you know, I'm reading the history of education, and I just got shocked this past few weeks that Africans actually fought very hard to have the British snobbery school. It was a freedom, and I didn't know how to.
I went to a
it.
school. My secondary school in Nigeria. It's called Grange School. It's paired to a school in Manchester called the Grange School. Right, it's a British school, and when I say British school, I think it was founded in 1959, and for the first few years of its existence, it was only open to the children of colonial officers. It was only open to white kids. and it was a whole thing. The Nigerian elite fought that our kids must be allowed to attend this school until eventually it was racially integrated. I believe in the either late 60s or early 70s.
Yeah.
That's a school I went to.
How are we fighting to enter these things?
That's the school I went to. And the very insidious thing about institutions or schools like that is in the case of Grange, the school put on this veneer of having changed its identity. So it doesn't advertise to you, for example, the fact that we used to be a colonial school, racially exclusive. It doesn't tell you that.
Yeah.
Right. It in the adverts you see black teachers and black kids, and they don't talk about the UK at all. They talk about how it's a culture of continuous improvement, and in fact the names of the houses in the school are the four major rivers in Nigeria. So it sounds on the surface like this is localized, indigenous, and then you get in there and you realize, first of all, the entire syllabus from age 3 to age 16 is entirely British. British in a way that it's not the British system, it's British. Like you could you could do a Zoom call between your classroom and the classroom of someone in Nottingham, and you are learning the same things. So, for example, when I was in year 9, I studied history in year 9. We wrote the Key Stage 3 exam, which is an exam, a British exam, which has no meaning in Africa, but we wrote it. And I remember I got a level 9, which is like an A in history. And what history were we taught? We were taught, bear in mind, this was in Lagos, Nigeria, largest city in Africa. We were being taught about the dreadnought, which was a British weapon in the First World War, and mustard gas and trench foot and the Battle of the Somme. It was basically World War One and some World War II history from a British perspective. And the history we were taught was that Britain saved the world, that Britain won World War One, which is absolute nonsense. And that Britain was heavily involved in winning World War II, which again is also absolute nonsense.
Yeah, they didn't.
So I came out of that education system thinking that World War II was won by Britain with US help. Meanwhile, I think any adult would know now that World War II was actually won by Russia with Chinese help.
Yeah.
So we were given a completely nonsensical picture of how the world actually works. And we're told that is education.
But, okay, in the Kenyan case, that's why I find this thing so confusing. In the Kenyan case, like when I was in school, we were taught, oh, so-and-so discovered Mount Kenya, so-and-so discovered Lake Victoria, BS. But now, because of public complaints, it is now reported as the first white man to see XYZ was so-and-so.
Mm.
So you see, the aesthetic has changed, the language has changed, but they still are focused on Europe and Europe seeing us.
Yeah.
That's what confuses me about how Kenyans can think that this is independent, that this is anti-colonialism, because it's not.
So again,
it looks aesthetically like anti-colonialism, but it isn't.
So I'm also going to use my secondary school as a case in point to sort of compare that, because we had a similar experience in West Africa where, first of all, our principal he was a white South African, a guy called William Pope. Yeah, he was. And one of the things you would very often hear, we were told this almost on a daily basis, was that you are the future Nigerian elite. We were told this.
Yeah.
You are the future Nigerian elite. So, however, you are not the future Nigerian elite in the sense that you are trying to change or fundamentally reorder Nigeria. No, that you are just Nigeria's elite in terms of being individually excellent. That you are not the same as those other kids from down the road, right? You are different. You are special, right? And we were treated specially, to be fair. Like, to be fair, we were like, we had waiters at lunch. Like it was that kind of place. Yes, we did. It was that kind of place. So it's almost impossible to come out of such, and there are many schools like this in Nigeria, the supposed Nigerian elites, that's where the kids go to. So if that's where elite formation takes place in a society, and like it or not, those are the people who are going to grow up to become tomorrow's elites because their families have the financial resources to make that inevitable. Why is it any surprise that we're exactly where we are? Because at no point was the word colonialism ever mentioned once throughout my education in that system. At no point was it mentioned. Even in learning British history, colonialism was never mentioned. It was never mentioned that the entire reason why Britain became a significant country in the world was because it stole from everywhere else and became powerful off the back of stolen resources. That was never mentioned. Britain was powerful just by default. It was just powerful hanging in the air without context, right? So you are not told directly, but you are visually instructed indirectly that, first of all, Britain is the center of the world. And then secondly, that when, not if, but when you go to university in the UK, again, when, not if, because not a single one of us went to university in Nigeria. We all went to university either in the UK or in the US. A few in Canada, but mostly UK and US. I went to university in the UK. So when you go to university in the UK, if you choose to come back, because that's always an if, and most of us didn't come back, if you choose to come back, this is how you maintain your societal status. You're individually excellent. You're good at this. You know this better than the natives. The word native wasn't used, but it was implied. You know how to use your fork and knife very well. You know how to put on these social graces. You know how to, even if you have to speak with a Nigerian accent, you know how to use the word the correctly. So you know that if the is coming before a word that starts with a consonant, then it's the. But if it's a word that starts with a vowel, then it's the. Things that obviously are not taught to to regular Nigerian kids, right? And so you come out of there after 6 years with your head full of, like, you. First of all, you are so full of yourself. You're so incredibly pompous. Your ego is so massive for no reason, right? You're a 16-year-old. What the hell do you know? Why is your ego big? But your ego is so big. You've been told for 5 years that you are just the best thing since sliced bread. When it's lunchtime, you sit down at the table, the waiter brings a menu card to you and you order your food. Like, you don't you don't have to lift a finger to do anything. Everything is there, it's done for you. Um, Sometimes a school trip can be going to Barcelona if your parents can afford it anyway. That's a thing. So you grow up with this idea of, you think, what in my experience, the most damaging thing you grow up thinking is that yourself and the kids in Barcelona exist at the same level in the world.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely not true.
Yeah. I mean, that's why you complained, sorry to interject, you mentioned that we Kenyans believe in partnerships, that we are partners with Europeans. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. I think it's actually worse in Kenya because in Kenya, it's actually easier to pretend that that is the case. Kenya has much more access to the world. It's easier to travel the world with a Kenyan passport.
Yeah.
Logistically, it's easier. And then a lot of the world is also present in Kenya.
Yeah.
Be that as it may, you then come out of that institution with the idea that you are this thing called a global citizen. In hindsight, there is no such thing as a global citizen. Everybody is a local citizen.
Yeah.
Everybody is local. Even though both of us having this conversation are African, there's still context. I am still very much West African. You are still very much East African. And even within East and Western Africa, you are still Kenyan, and I am still, that is the reality of the world. Everybody has a local context, but you are taught that you're a global citizen, you're special, you're part of this verified global elite. So when you finish from Grange and then you usually go to a sixth form college in the UK. So all the Eatons and Harrows, some people end up going to those places, and then from there you go to Imperial College, which even the name, in hindsight, why the hell is it called Imperial College?
Yeah.
Like, it's hidden in plain sight, but you don't even realize it. Or you go to Oxford or Cambridge if your grades are good enough, or University of London, And then when you're done, maybe you get a job at Goldman Sachs or something, and you start rising through the ranks as part of the Western elite that you think you are, or you come back to Nigeria and basically, start being groomed to run the country, essentially. So you've been raised with all of the wrong ideas. So inevitably, when you get into positions of power back home, you're just going to replicate everything you know. The first thing you will do when you get into a position of power is that all the recommendations you are going to listen to will come from where you think the intellectual center of the world is, which is Britain or the US. That's the first thing that's definitely going to happen. You will never, if it's political power, you will never. I, I, I forget who made this comment. It might have been Mao Zedong, or might be misattributing this thing, where he said that someone who has never had the experience of the people could never lead the people when he has the opportunity, because what the hell does he know? So that's pretty much what happened. So except you took a very unorthodox route like I did, because for the fact that I was rebelling against the family religion, I basically got kicked out after university. So I had to basically find my own way in the world, and that was how I broke out of that trap of being an elite. Thank goodness for that. But for most people, that's not going to be the case, and they will eventually end up in positions of power in Kenya and in Ghana and in Nigeria. And the first thing they do is they go hire McKinsey or PwC, and those ones tell them implement every IMF directive, which is how a colonial system works. You don't have physical chains on, and you don't have someone pointing a gun at you and telling you do this or
yeah.
But everything you think of as the way the world should work is someone's, again, epistemic warfare. Your very ability to perceive of the world has been colored. So even you don't realize it's so insidious. Which is why I describe it as the closest thing that exists to mind control.
Okay, let me just ask. You see, like in Kenya, especially if you are going to be in literature like us, you will be told Goge Wathiong or decolonizing the mind, let's write in our ethnic languages. So how come the result is still the same? What's that? In fact, I've reached a point where I've told Kenyans, don't tell me about decolonizing, because it doesn't seem to make us question anything. It has become such a buzzword.
A buzzword, exactly.
Yeah. What's that about? Even though you see, you were fed on the British curriculum, as we were fed on a Kenyan curriculum, and yet we are still in the same. The outcome is still the same.
So I think in character and in practice, there is no real difference between the British system and the Kenyan system.
No, there isn't.
Now, what they then do is they figured out, which I think is a very evil thing. They figured out how to co-opt entities and ideas and words that should be colonial, and use them as laundering devices.
Yes.
For colonial information. So
sorry, let me just interject. The first conference on decolonizing we had here was sponsored by the British Council.
Of course it was. Of course it was. And the reason they would do that is because what they would define as decolonizing is not a systemic decolonization. It will always, first of all, they will always start with culture.
Yes.
And what they mean by culture, arts and entertainment.
Yeah.
That's what they mean by decolonizing. Paint more, if you're a painter, paint more black figures. If you're a writer, write more black characters. That's decolonization, supposedly, right? It's never challenged the fundamental basis of the Kenyan economy. Why should Kenya export cut flowers and tea when Kenya has some of the world's most fertile land? Why does Kenya import food?
Yeah.
Despite having all this fertile land. It's that is not decolonization that you go near. It's the safe talk shop decolonization where people get to feel good about themselves.
Yeah.
The kind of decolonization that you can talk about with a white person without making them uncomfortable.
Yes. Yeah.
The kind of decolonization that can center white people and make them feel like they are doing you a favor. Like Oh, our ancestors, some of our ancestors, wanted you to only write white characters and paint white people's portraits and um, sing music that is heavily influenced by European culture. That no, we want you to be your authentic selves.
By the way, sorry, there's a guy I started reading his work more closely who makes that argument. He says, why are you people saying that British education was imperialist and yet the British officers themselves said we want to protect African culture? By the way, they did.
Of course.
They
Of
did.
course.
They
Of
said
course.
that. So, and when I tell Kenyans that, their minds just, they don't know what to do with that because the narrative is these people suppressed and fought against our culture. But no, the British officers were saying, we don't want Africans to get education because they will imbibe British culture and we don't want them to be like Europeans. So that's what I just find, it's so convoluted. So
It's extremely
convoluted.
convoluted. Something else I'll also add, because we also had a similar, it's not quite on the level of Kenya, but we had a similar experience to that here in West Africa as well, where one thing that they were always very successful at doing in hindsight was coloring the meaning of the word culture.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So, because what does the word culture actually mean? Culture is an all-encompassing thing. Culture includes economics, it's the entire soul of a society.
Yeah.
But they managed to reduce culture to art and entertainment. That's what they mean by culture.
Yeah.
Growing up, I was always there's a place in Lagos called the Muson Center. It's like I would compare it to the convention center in Nairobi. So any major arts event, that's where it used to happen, right? And the events were always sponsored by the British Council or the US Embassy or Shell or something like that.
Alliance
Always, all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's always maybe Wole Soyinka wrote to play. It's been performed there. It's some cultural dance thing. And when I was growing up in school, we're always in and out of the Muson Center. There's always an event, almost on a monthly basis, right? And we'd get invited. And I didn't realize it at the time, but in hindsight, what we were being visually instructed was that this is what African culture means. African culture is dance. African culture is shallow stuff. It's entertainment. It's people wearing colorful outfits and twerking on stage, right? That is what culture is. So in your mind, you then grow up with the idea that African culture is trifling or it's pathetic because it's so focused on frippery and whatnot. So you then think that, well, the more serious things in the world are the things that, things like economics and business and governance, that those things are somehow separate from culture. And that everything African that you've grown up to know has focused around culture. So the serious things are the things that these other people can teach you about. Which is why you often hear, I don't know if that happens in Kenya, but you often hear Nigerians and Ghanaians say things like how to bring together the African culture with knowledge from the idea is that African culture in
with
and of
Western
itself.
technology.
Exactly. The idea is that African culture in and of itself does not include certain types of knowledge.
Yeah. That is
So
true.
you have to import certain knowledge and then somehow merge it. So basically, the entire framework and basis of the society will be European and American, and then it will have African print design on it. That's the idea. The idea is not to have an African centered society. It's basically to have a European society that has African print drawn all over it. I'll compare it to how this is a completely like left field comparison, but I'll compare it to how the so-called liberals in the Western world don't want anything fundamentally different from what the so-called conservatives want. All they want is that the same aeroplane that is dropping bombs on the same poor brown people should have a rainbow flag painted on it, and the pilot should be a woman. But
A woman of
fundamentally, nothing
color.
has changed. Yeah, exactly. But fundamentally, nothing has changed. That's how people see this so-called African culture versus Western knowledge thing. That the Western knowledge is the most important thing because that's where that's the fundamental basis of society. That's where technology comes from. That's where business and money comes from. That's what an economy is built on.
Philosophy, even
Yeah,
philosophy.
exactly. Philosophy, governance, yeah, all
Yeah.
of that. And then African culture is for Friday nights.
Spices.
Yeah, it's for Friday nights. So it's the stuff that you look at and you feel visually entertained. It's for sex. And that is what African culture is for.
So now tie that to the epistemic warfare. Basically, the idea is that we can't think outside of that.
The idea is that Africa has no information ecosystems of its own. Africans are basically primitive, and that they met us in our primitive states, and that is the white man's burden to elevate us. So it's our duty to be elevated by accepting their knowledge frameworks and merging those knowledge frameworks with our primitive whimsy. Our primitive nature is basically whimsical, non-serious stuff, but it's important to the world. It's precious to the world from an entertainment. It's important to the world the same way cave drawings are important to the world. It's like it's a part of the human story, but it's not important in an everyday sense. So if you want to become part of the global mainstream, you have to adopt our information framework because you don't have anything that can compare with that. So it's almost like if you were to go back in time and if you were to go back in time like 1,200 years and you were to have modern knowledge and access to modern equipment and technology and you were to take all of this back in time, the way you would relate to those people back in time, like a mini god almost, which is how they would view you, because you have the ability to do things that their minds cannot process. So that is how this machine would like Africans to relate to its information framework. So we are to be in an intellectually submissive position and we are to receive what has been benevolently bestowed on us by our intellectual superiors.
And that now is where the colonialisms are the same.
Exactly.
So it doesn't matter how you get there. We can get there in different paths, but we get to the point where we are the inferior knowledge.
Mm-hmm. And you must never see that as an affront or an assault against your basic humanity. You must always, again, you must be in that receptive position. You must see it as a gift, right? Which is why it's also very important that you often hear people ask. I get this question all the time in the decolonial space, that why do certain people always find it so important to police what you think about them or how you think about them? And this is why people ask, like, you literally used to castrate men with pliers in Kenya just on suspicion of being Mau Mau. So why the hell are you interested in whether I like you now or no? Why should I like you? And that's why it's important for them to feel like you harbor no animosity, because that is what guarantees the success of that project. Because the minute you harbor animosity, the minute you have a human grudge, then you are not being in the receptive position. That means that something is off about the project. It's not ideal. The ideal African is an African with no historical awareness, who just accepts that his default position is to receive, is to be a consumer, a passive consumer. His job is not to challenge any information or educational or knowledge frameworks. His job is just to receive. And you see this all over all over our information economy. You see this in governance, you see this in civil society, where, I mean, I have extensive interaction with civil society people because of how powerful they are, which I find very annoying. They're everywhere and they have way too much power and influence because of the amount of money behind them and where the money is coming from. And you will often hear in governance spaces, I hear this all the time in Nigeria, right? So you'll be at a National Assembly hearing over like a new law or something. And only for you to realize that the lawmakers have all been privately briefed and they've all been coached a certain way. And you dig one or two layers beneath the surface and you realize that all of this came from civil society people who have told them, like they consider it to be education, but it's just indoctrination. I'll give you an example. Last year, there was a Senate hearing. This was in Nigeria. There was a Senate hearing on the food sector. And basically, the purpose of this hearing was to rewrite Nigeria's food laws, the laws governing food and agriculture in Nigeria. And there was a hearing where there were two Senate members, including the chairman of the Committee on Agriculture. And then there were 7 other participants in this supposed hearing, like a round table. And I actually did a story about this. All of those 7 were all, by 1 or 2 degrees of separation, funded by the Gates Foundation. All 7. So you would think you're having a roundtable session and you are hearing the same buzzwords and the same message being repeated to you in different ways from different mouths. And you think, oh, this must be objectively true because so many different people are saying it in so many different ways from so many different sectors of this space. So it must be true. Meanwhile, it's just Bill Gates who has an interest, a financial interest in promoting GMOs. So those 2 Senate members, if not that I did the story, because by the way, when I did the story and it caused a big furore. One of the senators on that committee actually sent me a message because he didn't realize until he saw my story. He didn't realize. He thought that this is just a knowledge exchange. He didn't realize that he was being indoctrinated.
Actually, I wanted to bring that up. Usually when you talk about that, they think that Ford Foundation called you, they told you shall say this, and that
a lot of the time that's not the case.
And you are given money and you knowingly took the money. So even when I tell people, no, this is a paid message, what they think I'm saying is that somebody went there, was given hard cash and instructed, and they accepted. That's how they think.
That happens sometimes, but most of the time
it doesn't.
Most of the time,
in the right places at the right time, and
exactly.
Then you imbibe the message and you find yourself saying it.
Which is why they are also so heavily invested in getting into the classroom and influencing what the next generation thinks. That's the cheapest way of morphing a society or getting society to do what you want. Just get it into the textbooks, get it into the syllabus, and they will just grow up repeating it because that's what they heard in school. And this is the same pattern that plays out everywhere. In the media, where this is the space that I play, I remember sometime in 2021, when I first realized that there was a problem. I didn't know what the problem was. I had no idea, but I just knew that this cannot be right, that all of a sudden, because in Nigeria, Abuja is like the NGO capital. It's like Nairobi, right? All the NGOs are in Abuja. All the so-called new media, all the online-based media in Nigeria, which is primarily based in Abuja and which is funded by NGOs, right? Why are all of them reporting stories a certain way? So I'll give you an example. There was a dam that burst. It didn't burst. There's a dam in Cameroon called the Lagdo Dam. Now, whenever that dam is open, whenever there's seasonal flooding and they don't want the dam to burst, they open it. And the runoff comes into Nigeria. It goes into the Medway estuary and it causes like a lot of devastation along its path, right? This happens roughly once every 10 or 12 years. It's a long-standing pattern. Now, when that dam was being constructed, there was an MOU with Nigeria that Nigeria would construct a dam on its own side of the border to hold any potential excess runoff from the Lagdo Dam. That dam was called the Dasin Hausa Dam. Now, that dam was never constructed. It was budgeted for, but it never got built. So I think this was in 2022. The Cameroonian authorities, the Lado Dam reached 93% of its capacity and they opened it. No, it reached 97% of its capacity and they opened it. And there was a lot of flooding in Nigeria. Next thing you know, the the Nigerian government goes to town with this narrative that, oh, there's a it's it's not really anybody's fault. Flooding is due to climate change, and the way to solve this problem is for there to be climate equity, climate justice, and all of Nigerian media starts reporting, and then I'm noticing like the Pulitzer Center is funding stories talking about how this climate change, like stories around like human interest stories from people who were affected by the flooding, and it's being framed as though this is the result of climate change in Africa.
Mm.
Like I'm not even saying that like Western countries who are like big time polluters don't need to cut down their emissions or whatever, because that was the thrust of that story. I'm not even saying that's a bad thing, but the point is that's not what happened. You are basically letting a government off for its own irresponsibility. This piece of infrastructure that was meant to be built, that was budgeted for, as recently as 2021, it was budgeted for, and it never got built because somebody stole the money. That is what happened. And instead, you are letting them get away with this narrative that it's climate change. And I kept seeing repeated patterns like this all over the media where there's foreign funding for a certain type of story or for framing certain things certain way in a way that is not true. At first, very naively, I thought maybe these are bad actors in the Nigerian media space. Maybe it's the states that put them up to it, and maybe they're even the ones who are misleading the funding entities. But as I've sort of gotten deeper in the system, I come to realize that the funding entities are the ones giving all the instructions. They are the ones dictating essentially the country's entire narrative to us, and that these people making these decisions are not even Africans. So there's some white guy in Washington who is giving instructions and saying this should be reported this way, that should be reported that way, and then the media, which they own because they fund all of Nigeria's media, is reporting what they want to report. So, and then if you sit down in those meetings, the editorial meetings, because I've sat down in a couple, you realize that these are top-down instructions. These are not intellectual conversations. These are not exchanges. There's no opportunity to push back. These are just top-down instructions. Report this, tell this story. That's it. There's no debate. And then that knowledge is pushed out to 200 million people, and then it becomes true because everybody in the media is saying it. And then that's how basically you morph an entire society's psyche, because they're hearing it from school, they're hearing it from church, they're hearing it from their media and the civil society space. So obviously it must be true. They're hearing from their government as well. So it must be true.
Wow. Can we go to NGOs now that you mentioned?
Oh yeah, that's I think that topic is long overdue.
Yes. I don't know, where do you want to start? I was going over your interviews when USAID was supposedly collapsing. Maybe you can start there. Do you think things have changed since that time?
So I guess the naive expectation I had last year was that the collapse of USAID meant that these foreign destabilization budget was significantly reduced or it would stop. Actually, what has happened is that they've simply moved all the money off the books. They've simply made it untraceable.
Oh.
One of the things that happened last year was I remember I did a video almost gloating about it, which I kind of regret now. So NED, that's the National Endowment for Democracy, the famous NED, which is the cutout of the CIA specifically for the purpose of regime change using the color revolution template. NED was defunded, I think, in March last year. And I celebrated it. yeah, the empire is collapsing. And then, like 2 months later, the funding was quietly restored with a proviso which made NED even more dangerous than it used to be. Because the new proviso is that, unlike before, NED is no longer required to publicly report who its grantees are in a country. So
Oh,
previously, up until
yes.
2024, you could read the annual report and see exactly which organizations and individuals NED puts money behind in every country. Now, it's just a one-line description: promotion of democracy. Angola, promotion of democracy. That could mean absolutely anything. So you don't know where the money is going now. So the funding of USAID has not materially changed
Mm.
the status quo. All the terrible tricks that were being played are still being played. Um, the attempted color revolution in Tanzania last year, November last year, took place literally 9 months or 10 months after USAID was taken down. So clearly, the budget for these things still exists, it's still there. It's just that it's been moved to other places like the Ford Foundation.
Mm.
So, in my opinion, those institutions, the Media Network, the Ford Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, they're about to get a lot more dangerous than they already were.
And we are so vulnerable, so they
Yeah.
will be effective.
I mean, what I'm realizing now is that what all that theater with Elon Musk and Doge that was staged last year, it was basically two factions of the same empire just fighting over how to actualize the same vision. So the left, let me not say left, the liberal faction of the empire wants to be able to carry out this, wants to be able to wield this regime change machinery using the state. This right-wing libertarian faction wants to wield that machinery using the private sector. So
Mm.
they basically defunded the state machinery and moved all the money to the private sector or to private organizations. So instead of USAID and state institutions wielding the budget, it's now the Ford Foundation, which makes it less accountable
Because
and
it's a
potentially more
private.
dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, you see, like for us in Kenya, the issue is that in 1990, I think we were at a watershed moment where we should have talked about the economy, but the NGOs swarmed in. So now we have a whole what you call industrial complex.
Mm-hmm.
So if you attack the NGO industry, there are a lot of livelihoods
Exactly.
that you'll be attacking. But just explain how the industrial complex functions.
So I'm going to use Nigeria as a case in point because it's pretty much the same system that functions in Kenya. Now, let me start from the economic what's the word I'm looking for? Emasculation of a country,
Yes.
which is always the first step on the road to creating this NGO industrial complex. Now, as at 2015 or 2014, Nigeria was the third fastest growing economy in the world, behind only China and Qatar. It's growing at 7% annually. Was the largest economy in Africa and was forecasted to be Africa's first $1 trillion economy by 2024. Um, Nigerians in the diaspora were actually moving back to Nigeria, and I know because I was one of them. I was one of those I moved back in 2013 because all the opportunities were there. Now, parallel to all of this happening, starting from around, let me say 2009, is when this influx of foreign money under the guise of NGOs and civil society, that's when it started in earnest in Nigeria. At the time, we didn't really understand what it was or why, and we didn't think it was a problem. We just saw it as, oh, this is, Western bleeding hearts white people, always trying to talk about human rights. Because again, being the naive people that we were, we didn't understand that there is no Western power structure that cares about your human rights as an African. We really didn't understand that. We had been indoctrinated very successfully to think that there is a group of people on this planet who are just professional bleeding hearts, who just love humanity, and they are willing to put so much money and resources behind their love for humanity. Absolute nonsense, but that's what we believed. So Abuja became the base of operations. That's where the NGOs set up. So it started with stuff like NGOs that would. There's an NGO called SERAP in Nigeria. What it basically does is it's one of these like media and civil society freedom organizations, like the biggest one. And you would often meet. I actually know a couple of people who worked there quite high up, and they used to joke privately, oh, we're not really doing any work here. We're just anytime there's, let's say a journalist is arrested or something, they would release a statement, and then they would sue. They would sue the state, and then eventually it'd be released. And then so they would often joke to me that we're not really doing any work here. We're just making noise, but it pays well. So it seemed like it was a benign thing. And then a bunch of other NGOs started springing up as well. And then NGO funded media started springing up. Now, at the time, we thought it was a good thing. Okay, instead of state-dominated media, we now have independent media. Independent because the money is coming from outside of the country, so therefore it must be independent. Again, the penny didn't drop that if somebody's funding something, it's not independent. But because it's not the Nigerian state, therefore it's fine. Right? We have been indoctrinated to think that our only and most significant enemy in the world is the state, our state. Right? So between 2009 and 2012, there was this huge influx of foreign money, and they were taking up positions in the Nigerian information economy that we didn't recognize. I certainly didn't. When it became obvious that a power grab has been executed here was from 2013, when this operation to get rid of the then President Goodluck Jonathan, that's when he kicked into gear. And I realized one day that I'm flipping through, there's a Nigerian, it's basically a Nigerian Reddit. It's called Nairaland, right? It's basically the front page. If you flip through it, you basically have a snapshot of everything that's happening in the country at any given time. And so my daily routine then is I wake up in the morning, and one of the first things I do, I flip through Nairaland. I realized every headline I'm seeing from every news platform I'm familiar with in Nigeria, they're all saying the same community of things. And it's basically that this is the worst government Nigeria's ever had. This is the most corrupt president Nigeria's ever had. Like, this is the worst there's ever been. But the numbers are not agreeing with this. The numbers are saying that this country is growing at 7% annual GDP growth. Like, this is the fastest growing economy in Africa. So what do you mean? But the entire Nigerian media, there was this manufactured wave of constant angst. We're talking like 18 months to 2 years of just constant everyday noise, manufactured noise. So Goodluck Jonathan would breathe and there would be a problem. There was a time he was asked, he was giving he was responding to an interview. He was asked about what does he think about how Nigeria deals with corruption? What are his thoughts on Nigeria's anti-corruption strategy? And the answer he gave, I thought, was a pretty decent and unspectacular answer. He said that people often make this thing out. They mystify it when they use terms like corruption. That this is basically just stealing. This is theft. And that we have ways of dealing with theft. That all we need to do is enforce the rules we have for dealing with thieves. That ordinary stealing is what people are calling corruption. We are mystifying this thing. The Nigerian media all went to town the next day with the headline, Jonathan, stealing is not corruption. That became a whole. If you Google,
wow,
if you Google it,
we are so creative.
Google it right now. Goodluck Jonathan, stealing is not corruption. Google it, you'll still see so many results that it became a whole thing. It took on a narrative life of its own. Until today, there are still millions of people in Nigeria who believe that Goodluck Jonathan made a statement to the effect of stealing is not corruption.
Wow.
There was this huge manufactured. I'll give you another example. In 2012,
that's evil genius.
Yes. In June 2012, Nigeria's last major civil aviation disaster happened. The Dana Air Flight 992, where I think 112 people died, including a friend of mine. Within 30, 45 minutes of the news coming out that a civilian airliner has gone down in Lagos. News was already flying around, like a broadcast message was flying around. Then, WhatsApp wasn't big. It was the big thing then was BlackBerry Messenger.
Mm.
There was this broadcast message flying around BlackBerry Messenger that the reason the plane went down is that the so the plane was distressed. It needed to land. Something was wrong with the engine, but that the pilot wasn't given permission to land because the president's wife wanted to land first, and that the plane circled for 30 minutes waiting for the president's wife to land, and that before the plane could land, it ran out of fuel or whatever, and then it crashed, and then everybody died. The president's wife was at home in Abuja. It simply didn't happen. It was completely made up. But as we speak till today, there are hundreds of thousands, even millions of people in Nigeria who believe that Ghana Air Flight 992 went down because of Patience Jonathan. There are people who still believe it. So there was this very well-funded information wall, and it was this NGO ecosystem that was behind it. And I remember at the time when I realized like maybe 30% of what was going on, because I was in the media space and I was realizing that what these people are reporting is not what is happening on the ground, like at all. We are attending conferences almost on a daily basis. We are attending workshops and meetings, and the whole world is trying to get a foothold in the Nigerian economy. The whole world is describing Nigeria as the next big opportunity. We're being classified as part of a new development bloc called MINT. That was Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey as of 2015. Like, everybody can see where this country is going. The media is reporting something entirely divorced from reality. They're reporting that poverty is growing, and it's not true. They're reporting metrics which don't exist. And then the Boko Haram thing comes in, and at the time, Boko Haram its theater of operations was restricted to 3 local government areas in the northeast of Nigeria, which is too many, but still it was 3 local government areas. When you read the Nigerian media at that time, you would think that Boko Haram it's entering Victoria Island. It's in Lagos. Like, Boko Haram is outside your door. Goodluck Jonathan has sent Boko Haram to your children's school. That's the way they created this incredible sense of panic for what was then a very small and localized problem. So these terrorists, they will blow up like a post office or a police station somewhere in Damaturu, right? It's like really like open, unguarded area. They'll blow it up. Next thing you know, you'd see the pictures. Front page, everywhere, all over. And then the big event that finally sort of broke the dam was when there was that Chibok girls kidnapping incident. Bring Back Our Girls 2014. And then there was no other news to report in Nigeria. It wasn't just the NGO funded media, the NGOs themselves then came out. There's a popular bridge in Lagos called Falamo Bridge. Like, it's a huge popular intersection. You would see posters with pictures of the girls, the missing schoolgirls, like all over the bridge, printed in this very unique sort of red and white color scheme, so that they're very you can't miss them. They were staging weekly sit-ins and protests at a place called Unity Fountain in Abuja. Constant wall-to-wall media coverage. One of the biggest daily newspapers in Nigeria is called The Guardian. There was a permanent front page insert for close to a year. You can imagine how much that would cost to have a front page insert for 8 months, every day, including Sunday, every single day. At the end of the day, the guy, he had no chance really because of what he was up against, right? And that's how that guy was run out of town. Now his successor, who they all heralded as the savior who's coming to save Nigeria, Muhammadu Buhari. I don't think I need to explain what Muhammadu Buhari did to Nigeria.
You explained in our other conversation, yeah.
It was under Muhammadu Buhari that Nigeria became a place that was so inhospitable that people started fleeing from there to live in Roysambu.
What?
Yeah, Roysambu became a preferable place to live because it was easier to survive in Githurai, in Roysambu, than in Lagos. That was what Muhammad Buhari did. And throughout that 8 years that he was in power, this same media ecosystem, which had been so hostile, all of a sudden everybody became an objective news reporter. All of a sudden, oh, you have to give the government time. They can't fix everything in one day. All of a sudden became, oh, change begins with me. You people are always blaming the government, but if such and such is happening, why don't you think about what you contributed to it? If there is flooding, why? It's because you disposed of your rubbish in the drains. The same. I'm sure you hear some of that same
Yeah. Yeah,
moralistic
I mean,
nonsense.
yeah.
Kenya, well.
Mm.
And that's what. So that was the reason I chose to start this narrative from there, is to give a background into the kind of power that NGOs wield.
Yeah.
And they've unseated a president before. They're that powerful. Something else I also didn't mention. They didn't just go after the conventional media space. They even went after kids as well. They created an animated show called Ogas at the Top, and the whole point was to mock the then sitting president. So after sort of emasculating the economy, taking an economy from $580 billion to, I think, 240 or something, like an economy lost like half of its size in 8 years. And like there was such a human cost, such wealth destruction on a scale we've never seen before. Then anyone who had access to US dollars became a prince in Nigeria. And that's the second layer where NGOs are so destructive.
Yeah.
Because in addition to their political distortion of the country, their ability to completely destroy a country's future, the people within these NGOs who are funded then have the capacity to completely distort the local economy. I'll give you an example. Someone was talking to me recently that as of 2014, when the Boko Haram crisis was just really becoming a problem in Maiduguri, which is like in northeastern Nigeria, he's a landlord there, right? He owns a house. And he was approached by an NGO in Abuja, and they offered to rent out his house for 10 years, like pay for 10 years. And they're an NGO that deal with like humanitarian assistance to refugees and whatnot. And he turned them down because he was worried about, like, is this money laundering or something? Why would you offer me 10 years rent up front? But then when he sat down and thought about it later, he was like, why would a humanitarian NGO offer to pay upfront for 10 years? Are they saying that in 10 years' time, this crisis is going to still exist, or probably even get worse? And that's exactly what happened. It had got much worse in 10 years' time. So these NGOs went around doing things like that, paying for 10 years property upfront, raising property prices because they have so much money, especially in real estate. This was the primary distortion that they've created in Nigeria. Now, because of the sheer amount of money that has been pushed into the real estate sector through NGOs in Nigeria, because these directors and program officers and whatnot, they are all homeowners in some of the most expensive parts of Nigeria, because they get paid in USD. If you're getting paid $150,000 a year in Nigeria, you're a prince.
That's a lot of money.
You're even $80,000. Like you buy a house, you're a prince. So all that money is pouring in. For the first time since I was born in Nigeria, I see people who are in university and their ambition is to graduate and get a job in an NGO.
Yeah, my students.
That never used to happen.
Say.
Previously, the aspiration was, I want to get a job in an oil company. I want to get a job in government. I want to get a job in the bank or something like that. Now it's, I want to work for an NGO. Because everybody now knows NGOs is where the US dollars are. You don't get paid in Naira, you get paid in dollars. So that's like a very big thing. Real estate markets in Lagos and Abuja is now completely divorced from any economic fundamentals in Nigeria. So the minimum wage in Nigeria is 77,000 Naira a month, which in US dollars is roughly $50 a month, right? That's the minimum wage in Nigeria. Now, the least that you can get, like not even a one-bedroom apartment, just like a bed sitter, right? The least you can get it for in like a suburb of Lagos. I'm not talking about CBD, is out of question. Like, let's say like Ikorodu or something. We're talking maybe 700,000 So that's 10 times the monthly minimum wage, and you have to pay for a year up front.
What?
Yeah, you don't pay monthly in Nigeria. You pay a year
Yeah,
or
okay.
2 years. So you have to pay a year up front.
Wow.
So they're basically asking someone to, and that's for like the cheapest possible one, which I'm sure these prices are probably out of date. It's probably got to like 1 million now. So you're asking for 10 times the monthly minimum wage for someone to have their own place to live. And this is like a tiny bed sitter, like basically just room, toilet, and maybe a little space for a kitchen. That's it. No living room. That's the cheapest place you can get. I remember when I used to run West Africa Weekly, I used to feel really bad because so a reporter then was getting paid about 150,000, which is like double the minimum wage. And none of my reporters on their own could afford their own place. Some of my reporters were living with family. One of them was sporting with a friend. Meanwhile, these people have full-time jobs, and by Nigerian standards, they're getting paid a decent full-time income, but they couldn't afford their own place to live. And that's what NGO distortion does to an economy. It makes it such that everyone starts chasing USD because that's what the NGOs are known for. They pay in USD. So they pay, a receptionist can get paid $300 a month, which in Nigeria is that's like 600,000 naira. So that places you in the top 5% of the country. So the educational system has been distorted, first of all, because people are
Yeah,
no longer studying.
like
Yeah,
now, because I'm in the system, the degrees are distorted, especially in the humanities and social sciences. So now they have NGO-nized names, human rights,
of course.
yeah,
Of course.
tourism. What else have we been told? Yeah, community development.
Right.
Yeah, just development. So those kinds of names. We've been
And then
forced
like
to rename our courses that way.
and then the final point I'll make about NGOs, which I think is probably the worst thing about them, is that they have completely distorted governance as you know it.
Okay.
Previously NGOs used to be an add-on to the governance process. So where the state couldn't fill certain gaps is where you would find NGOs supposedly filling. Now the NGOs have become a primary layer of governance. NGOs are now written into law. Or okay, let me not say NGOs, let me say foreign aid is now written into law.
Yes. Yeah, in fact, the government sounds like an NGO, and yet
Yeah,
it's the GO.
yeah. So
Yeah, they talk like NGOs.
state capacity is no longer a
Yes.
priority. So the state no longer thinks of itself as an entity that has a responsibility to provide services.
Yeah.
It now talks about our development partners, funding
Yeah.
partners, and
Yes. Oh, that was I didn't even know that was originally a geo language. God.
yeah,
Even the per diems, which have corrupted civil servants, it came from the NGOs, the meeting
right,
in hotels, that's
right,
NGO
right, right, right,
culture.
right.
I think for me, well, even us, the public, we talk about politics with NGO language also. We don't talk
Yes,
about
increasingly,
political
yes.
obligations, sovereignty. We talk about human rights.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that kind of language.
Even when we're talking about the serious things that the state is supposed to do, we're still using NGO language. We use terms
Yeah.
like service delivery.
Yes. Yeah.
That's an NGO term.
Yeah.
What you actually mean is state responsibility. Or you
Yes.
say service delivery. What do you mean by that?
The politicians, they also operate like NGO activists in a way, because even instead of like MPs, their role is to pass law, but now they are building schools, giving handouts to people to cope with
Yes,
the
yes,
economy.
yes, yes,
That's
that.
NGO, that came from the
Exactly.
NGOs.
That is actually true. That's never occurred to me, but that's completely true. That's absolutely true. Where they gather a bunch of poor people and start handing out motorcycles and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. That's what our MP, the politicians now do. when I was opposing the new system, I was trying to I was surprised that Kenyans were not bothered about the foreign interference. And I would be like, but you guys are always telling us about decolonizing the mind and what. But I think we don't see a problem with racism because that has now been overtaken by NGO language.
Yes.
So you're talking about rights.
Yeah.
But to say this is racist, you can't say it anymore. It's about rights.
Yeah, people people take offense at you for calling out a racist thing. I've experienced this where funny enough, it's a guy who spends a lot of his time in Kenya. He's a guy called Jeffrey Smith. He runs this thing called Vanguard Africa. So they're this like lobby group / talk shop who there. And when I released my documentary or the trailer for the documentary, this guy who was obviously involved in this Color Revolution attempt last year, he starts, going. He writes. I think he has written like 6 different op-eds now, or across Kenyan and Tanzanian media. He's like going on a road trying to discredit me, and then he goes and takes an old photo of me, puts it into ChatGPT, and then generates like this this version of the photo where like he made my lips bigger, like he turned my face into like a racial stereotype kind of thing and made it look horrible. And then made that the cover photo of an article that he did that was criticizing the documentary. And I called it out that look at this racist ass, what he's doing. And he was rather than able to take offense at me for calling him racist. And by the way, not a single Kenyan who saw that exchange sided with me.
They sided with him.
They either just remained neutral, or or didn't say anything.
Well, the economy is skewed, especially you see, like in Kenya, if you're not employed by the government, which is now, of course, rare, you're employed by NGOs as a university graduate. And that cuts across all sectors, even health sector, you find doctors working in these health NGOs. So
and by the way, even when it's not a charity, even when it's not an NGO per se, the principle is still the NGO principle. Even I've seen this in the tech space. I used to date a Kenyan who was in the tech space, and I saw this firsthand where this foreign entity comes and they claim they're trying to build something in Kenya, and maybe they hire like a local team lead, and the local team lead is to hire a local team, right? And I'm looking at the premise of this entire project, like it's a blockchain project, and I'm like, this is clearly never going to make money. This is a completely pointless thing. What is the purpose of this? But they keep pouring so much money into it on a monthly basis. So like you see on a monthly basis, someone is pumping $25,000 into this project, which is clearly not going anywhere. And they keep at it for 2, 3, 4 years. And then eventually, when obviously, as expected, it didn't go anywhere, they eventually shut it down. Within 6 months, the person who has just been let go finds another gig that is the same thing. So even though that's not an NGO per se, but it's the same NGO principle, someone is pumping money in for a reason that you are not entirely familiar with.
Yeah.
Right? Because they definitely have their reason for pumping in that money. Maybe there's some data they're gathering. You don't know what it is that they're actually doing. And they are just using you as a convenient, as like a paper shuffling front to get at what they really want. And even you may not be aware of the role that you're playing. You think you're doing honest work. You're doing an actual job, and you're getting paid ridiculously well. They're paying you $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month. You're not actually doing any work. You're setting up. You're doing busy work. That's what I call it. You're setting up seminars. You're doing hackathons. You're having 3 meetings every day. You're traveling to Malindi. You're doing this and that and the other, and you're doing absolutely nothing. And someone is paying you to keep you very busy.
I think it's an indirect way of stagnating also our economies, because it means people who should be innovating or even challenging the system, they are too busy with these kinds of preoccupations.
Yeah, so like I've actually met a Kenyan tech founder who told me that she believes that a lot of this tech funding that comes in specifically to stop people from building
Innovating.
real solutions.
I think so
That
too.
the actual things that would materially improve the lives of people in that country and across the continent, that those things aren't getting built because someone is coming in and paying people $5,000 a month to sit down and build another fintech platform to add to the 50,000 that already exist.
Now that you mentioned the documentary, maybe we can go to that. Like I told you, my observation at the screening in Nairobi was that there was a clash of narratives. You were talking about a color revolution, but the Kenyans were talking about the usual Kenyan thing that happens at elections. A president steals an election, people riot, and they are killed. That's how Kenyans read elections, and it comes from a painful experience. What would be your response to that? Because I think that was the clash that I noticed. So maybe you can start by saying what your argument was and your response to that reaction.
So I did notice that a lot of people seem to be responding to what they thought the documentary said versus what it actually said.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
so first of all, I should say that what happened in 2024 in Kenya was a completely different thing to what happened in 2025 in Tanzania. What
Yeah.
happened in 2024 was an organic uprising in response to predatory legislation, which was written by the IMF, and which the IMF itself predicted openly 6 months in advance would lead to social unrest, and which it basically forced the Kenyan government to, well, let me not say forced, but which it instructed the Kenyan government to push through, regardless of the social cost, which is pretty much what happened. Because even though supposedly the bill didn't pass, every single provision under that bill has been passed piecemeal.
Yeah.
So basically, Ruto, the IMF got what it wanted, one way or
Yeah.
the other.
Yeah.
So that was what happened, and that was what led to what happened in 2024 in Kenya. Now, what happened in Tanzania in 2025 is a completely different thing. The fact that people were on the streets and it looked visually familiar doesn't mean that they were the same thing, right? Two things can look similar while being completely different from each other. Because what happened in Tanzania, first of all, unlike Kenya, was not an organic event. It was something which was curated, which was planned. And by the way, this planning wasn't really done in secret, right? Because a lot of this planning happened on social media spaces. A lot of the records exist. And this planning had been going on for much of the preceding 2 years. And it's included people that I even know personally. So the lady who's at the center of the whole thing, Maria Sarungi, said hi. We used to be friends once upon a time. In my more naive years, back in 2022 and 2023, when I used to accept invitations from the Atlas Network and people like that, I remember we were both affiliated with an organization called HRF, the Human Rights Foundation, which is founded by a guy called Alex Gladstein. Long story short about HRF is that it has links to the CIA. That's the it's a very long story, but again, let's not even get into that. Let's just say the HRF is a US government extension, right? It pretends to be this left-leaning, you know, socially liberal organization that funds human rights, yada yada yada. And they have this obsession with Bitcoin because supposedly Bitcoin protects against state financial censorship of their activists and whatnot. Meanwhile, what they're actually doing, the real purpose of HRF is fomenting, is part of the color revolution infrastructure. And their role within that infrastructure is to promote the use of digital currency so as to get around state restrictions in the jurisdictions that they're targeting. But some of those jurisdictions, it's not easy to send money into the country. So using cryptocurrency as a way to get around restrictions, that's primarily what HRF does, right? We're both affiliated with it. I didn't really understand these things back then. So that was where I met someone I used to be friends with, a lady called Magat Wade from Senegal. So we're all in that same ecosystem. We're all in that same wider group. So I knew her socially. And I knew even as far back as then, this lady is involved in some kind of like, she has this need to get rid of the Tanzanian government. Like she seems to hate these people in a way like that was almost unsettling. And I assumed naively at the time it must be because of something they've done, there's some human rights issue or something. That's what it's about. I obviously didn't know that this person is being heavily funded and that is basically her job to do that. Now, in the run-up to this election, this lady she had received nothing less than $1 million on her own. There are other actors involved in this, but on her own, nothing less than $1 million.
That's a lot
to
of money.
saturate Tanzania's social media space with certain narratives. Something else I think a lot of people don't also recognize that this didn't even start in 2022. It started as far back as 2020. The last Tanzanian election, which John Magufuli took part in, which he won an 84% majority. During that election, some of these same characters and actors were involved in trying to create a false narrative. So on election day, there were people who were generating, even if you remember at the time, AI generated photos the technology was still very new at the time. So AI generated photos were not that great at the time. This was the first iteration, the first generation of AI generated photographs back in 2020. They were using like altered photographs and like old videos from somewhere else in the world. And they were trying to create the impression that there was a crisis going on in Tanzania when no such thing was happening. As far back as 2020, these people had already started with these tactics to try to create social unrest and panic, right? And that's what carried over into this. So they had this huge social media campaign, which was fully monetized, and they managed to convince their supporters that this thing called no reform, no election was like a social imperative for them. Now, when you dig into the so-called no reform, no election, which I guarantee most of their supporters never did, you will find out that the premise for no reform, no election was that the main opposition party, the so-called Chadema, which I'll get into in a second, their grounds was that they want a new constitution. And the government said, well, between now, because this was in April, between now and the election is like 6, 7 months. There's no way we can write a constitution in that short space of time. And writing a new constitution is a process that has to involve public consultation. The public has to be involved.
Mm.
And the presidential candidate of Chadema, the guy called Tundu Lissu, who is a lawyer, said that under Tanzanian law, that the parliament has powers to pass a new parliament within 5 months without public participation. And that's what he said, that except they pass this new constitution, which will be written to their liking, that there will be no election, no reform, no election. So behind all the sloganeering, that is what it was. And what were these reforms that were being proposed for the constitution? It was to basically roll back the Tanzanian state and turn Tanzania into a neoliberal economy, sell off state-owned enterprises or remove the monopoly status of state-owned enterprises, basically prime Tanzania for the extraction that will make it a typical post-colonial African state, turn Tanzania into Nigeria. Basically, everything is on sale. Foreign investors can come in and pick up everything at bargain basement prices, all that stuff. Foreigners should come in and buy up land because currently in Tanzania, foreigners aren't allowed to own land. Those were the reforms. The reforms were basically how to sell how to sell Tanzania from under the feet of Tanzanian people. That's the reforms that they were on about. Which is why I said I guarantee most of
that slogan. Now I can see why Kenyans would sympathize with it. It was a Kenyan one in the 90s.
I'm sure that was deliberate.
It was deliberate. So Kenyans are thinking, oh, we are in the same boat as Tanzania.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly. Because what Kenyans remember as reforms is what they think this is about. It's not the same thing.
It's not the same thing. Okay.
Because what they thought of as reforms back then was multi-party elections.
Yeah.
Tanzania already has multi-party elections. This is not what it was. This was primarily about turning Tanzania into a neoliberal extraction state, which the ruling party obviously is on the other end of the ideological spectrum. And they are opposed to that. Now, if you insist that you want to turn Tanzania into a neoliberal extraction state, and you are able to use the levers of governments or the democracy that you have to do that, that's fine. If the people go along with it, that's fine. But you say no, you are not even going to do that. You are rather going to use violence, because he said if they don't give you this thing that you want as the opposition entity, then you are going to stop the election from happening, from holding, using violence if necessary. So, of course, if you make that kind of statement, of course you will get arrested by the state and charged with treason. Of course you will, and you should. Because what you are essentially calling for is a national rebellion. Now, I know that coming from me, that might sound hypocritical, someone that regularly calls for national rebellion in Nigeria. But the difference is that if I am calling for national rebellion in Nigeria, I'm not pretending, if like I get arrested for it or something, I'm not going to pretend that what I'm doing is I'm protecting democracy or something. No, I'll own it with my chest that this is why I believe I needed to circumvent the democratic process. This is why I don't believe democracy works here. This is my ideological stance on this. I own it. Well, instead, this Tundulisu guy goes and turns this thing he did, which was treasonous against the state, into, and he recasts himself as Malcolm X, fighting for Tanzanian democracy. Everybody eats it up because, again, the NGO media amplifies a certain narrative, and everybody eats it. And then you have all these people then coming from Kenya and trying to attend his court hearing to again amplify the narrative that a defender of democracy is being persecuted by the Tanzania. That is not what happened. So all of these people involved in this process, they're lying to the Tanzanian people and to the Kenyan people about what was happening. And unfortunately, because the media machine behind them was so powerful, because you had the CNN involved in this same narrative laundering process, you had the BBC getting involved. So eventually what happens all too often is that when too many powerful people have said the same thing, and when you're hearing the same thing from too many people, eventually it just becomes accepted as true by default. So eventually, even those who know what happened will eventually give up on trying to explain it, or they will start doubting their own memory of what happened, because why is everybody saying the same thing? Which is why I thought that this documentary needed to be put out. There needs to be something on record. Like, we might not have the resources of a CNN or a BBC, but without the little voice and reach that we have, we need to put out something that will be on record, that will serve to inform the future historical record that this idea that Tundu Lissu was arrested by the state and tried because the state didn't want, the ruling party didn't want competition, they wanted to win. That is not what happened at all. And I'm not saying this as a different, I'm not even Tanzanian. I don't have any interest, I don't have any stake in Tanzanian local politics. The Tanzanian ruling party is not, doesn't mean anything to me. But the fact is that this is the same narrative laundering that was used to ruin Nigeria, where some people convinced an entire population that blue is red. Some people looked at the situation in Nigeria where the country was absolutely on its way up and convinced the entire Nigerian population that the opposite was what was happening. The Nigerian population that was shopping on ASOS every month, that was taking weekend trips to Dubai, regular office workers, not rich people, they were taking weekend trips to Dubai, things that they had never done before. They were able to do. Their purchasing power was at a level that had never been at before. And those people who were enjoying this material upliftment were convinced that this is the worst they had ever had it. And then they were convinced to vote against their own interests. And now all those people have had to flee the country. They're all living in Canada, in UK, in Australia, in the US now. I can see the same thing, although for a different reason, being done to Tanzania, where a country that clearly, first of all, it is on its way up economically as well. That is indisputable. Even the IMF says so. And then its development model is completely divorced from the so-called, from what is recommended by the neoliberal people. That what you need to develop as an economy is you need to sell everything, give everything to private investors, basically let white people develop your land for you, because we are not capable of developing it yourself. They have adopted a completely different approach, and they're succeeding. And then all of a sudden, these same foreign actors then come and start funding a group of these supposed activists to start poisoning the minds of people that, no, what you need is democracy, as if what you have already isn't democratic. You need this curated entity called Chadema, which I said I was going to get into. What is Chadema itself? Because I also guarantee that the majority of the people, both within Tanzania and in Kenya, have no idea what Chadema is. which is why I also explored that in the documentary, that this is not a real opposition party. It was created by Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. It's literally an artificial entity that was inserted into Tanzanian politics by a foreign government, because CAS is the think tank wing of Germany's ruling party, the Christian Democratic Union. So you can imagine it would be like, let's say Nigeria's ruling party, the APC, had a think tank, and then that think tank went and created an artificial opposition party in Kenya, funded it, funded it to build like its physical and ideological structures across the country, funded it to pay salaries to its members and whatnot. Wouldn't you consider that to be political interference of the worst kind? What business does a foreign government have creating a political party in another country? But that's what Chadema is. Until we started working on this documentary, even I didn't know that. I was so surprised to find out. So why are people acting like these are legitimate actors? They're not. It's not a legitimate opposition party. The people pushing this narrative are not legitimate people because they're being funded to do so. The narrative itself is not legitimate because it's being pushed for the purpose of turning Tanzania into, an extractive state as compared to what it is, and basically reversing its economic gains. From the point of view of the Kenyan audience, I think it's very important that they understand how to separate issues. Just because it's not every time young people are on the streets that something righteous is happening. People can be misled. The young people who were on the streets in Kenya in 2024 were acting organically. The young people who were on the streets in November 2025 were not acting organically. And by the way, those people, some of those protesters who were trying to stop the election from happening, were actually attacking people who voted. People's fingers were getting cut off for having voted. And of the Presidential Commission report, which revealed I think 518 people died, it's impossible to know of that 518 how many of those people were killed by the state and how many of them were killed by these so-called protesters, because they did kill people too. So it's important people understand that the story that has been sold to them by the CNNs or those are complete fabrications. That is not what happened. The so-called mass grave that Larry Madowo reported on, and their proof for the mass grave was satellite photos of the biggest cemetery in Dar es Salaam, which I was able to go there in person. There is no mass grave there. They just made it up. It didn't happen. And I think the last point I'll make about the documentary is that the so-called CNN investigation, and the investigation which was published by Kenya's Daily Nation, the open source investigator that basically did both investigations is a guy called Benjamin Strick, who works for the MI6, right? So he works for the Center for Information Resilience, which is an NGO, which is funded by the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, founded by two former MI6 officers. It's funded by the FCDO. Its board members are all foreign intelligence assets. So Cindy Otis, who's the former CIA analyst, Nina Jankovic, who's the former Department of Homeland Security senior officer, and then Hendrik Thomas Ilves, Estonia's former foreign minister and president, who led the country into NATO. So that is a foreign intelligence establishment, 100%, right? And the information coming out of there is that there is a mass grave in Tanzania. That information is not credible. The source is not credible. Even if I hadn't gone there in person to investigate it for myself, just from seeing where the source is, I can already conclude that information is not credible. So what I would advise if there's a Kenyan audience watching this is learn to be more critical about what you take into your mind. Stop taking things at face value. People lie. The media is a very important and powerful tool, and the people who fund the media, people who have the resources, I can tell you this as someone who is a media owner on a very small scale. The resources it takes to keep media running, even at the very, very tiny level I am, which is basically social media distribution, is immense. Not to talk of what it would take for someone to run like a CNN, an Al Jazeera, a Daily Nation. We're talking billions of shillings. Billions, right? The people who are willing to spend that kind of money without getting a return on it, because, newsflash, there is no financial return here. The people who are willing to spend that kind of money and get no financial return are not doing so because they are charitable. It's because they are pushing other agendas. They are pushing agendas that are profitable to them in other ways. So I think Kenyans should learn to be a bit more selective about what they believe. And I'm not saying that Google is a reliable source of information necessarily, but people need to develop a Google habit, just habitually. Instead of just believing something you see at face value, just interrogate it for 5 seconds first.
I think the issue, the way I've heard Kenyans say, for them, it's the narrative they're protecting. It's not the details. Okay, they'll say, oh, where is the evidence? But it's not the details that they are attacking. It's the narrative. Yeah. The narrative has to fit, bad dictator, rigged elections, people went to the streets and they were killed. That's the narrative that is being upheld.
Yes.
And they're using vocabulary that is familiar to Kenyans, like the now no reform, no election. So I think I could see it in the when you had come, that's what was it's the sequence of events. It's not the facts. It's a sequence of the story you're telling that is that they are struggling for. And that one is very hard to, because even Uganda, they do that. We do that to Uganda. And I'm not saying that Uganda has an angel for a president, but I think the dynamics are different. You cannot.
The dynamics are always different.
You cannot cluster the Kenyan
copy and paste
narrative
it
there.
from one country to another.
But you see, we are not even aware of narratives, because if you go now back to the epistemic warfare, we've been taught to see things as facts, isolated facts, and we don't realize that we are sequencing them in a narrative. And if you try to tell people this is a narrative, it's not about the facts.
I think this is where you start to run into the fundamental programming behind the Kenyan psyche, because I've run into this a number of times, where you first come up against something that looks very intellectual and looks very critical, but when you start to question some of the assumptions underpinning it, all they just do is repeat the same thing back at you and seem unable to question their own assumptions. They just keep repeating. It's like a programmed robot, so it's just repeating it back at you. So even when I was in Nairobi, I had this conversation with a number of people that this contrived event of Tanzania, this thing that you think happened, is not what happened at all. And it's like, you show them the evidence and they just end up repeating, oh, so even if all that is true, even if that's the case, why are they killing their own people? You've tried to explain that, first of all, the numbers are not true. And yes, of course, some people died. You don't know who actually killed who in a lot of the cases. But yes, the state definitely did kill some people. And this is why. It's like, well, why did they kill their own people? Why are they killing their own people? It's like it's talking to a mechanical robot. Like, nothing you're saying is clicking. And again, it goes back to what I was saying about epistemic warfare, where you've been programmed with one thing, like the Jehovah's Witness, who has been programmed that this is the truth. Anything that conflicts with that statement fundamentally cannot compute. So computer says no. Computer says no. Computer says no.
I mean, even mine is more sort of harmless, quote unquote. But one of the things we were told when the education system was being changed is that we are now doing away with exam obsession. Then I said, but that's not where exams came from. And I would always hit this wall where people say, no, we still don't want exams. Then I'm trying to tell them, but that's not how exams came about. It was a colonial tool for sifting out people who would go to the net. It refused. It refused. Because that narrative, I think it's not supposed to be questioned. Those assumptions are not supposed to be questioned. So once you raise the question, then they go back to that loop. It's like a loop. They now say, but
loop. That's exactly the word. That's exactly the word. It's a loop. Breaking out of it.
It's very
I don't think
difficult.
there's anything we can say on Maisha Kazini that would make anybody break out of it. I think it's an individual decision.
Yeah.
Because And I can say this from experience because I've had to break out of two major ideological prisons in my life. The first being the religion I was born into, the second being the political identity that I once had. It is a very scary thing to do.
It is.
The reason it is scary is that it involves you admitting to yourself that your head is basically empty. You don't know as much as you anywhere near as much as you think you do. The world is much bigger than you thought it was. That there are powerful people with agendas that involve you that even you are not aware of. That there are external entities which are in control of your brain and are making your decisions for you. Again, it's a mentally painful thing.
It is.
To realize that I'm not as smart as I thought I was. I'm not as informed as I thought I was. I'm not as in control as I thought I was. And that the world that is around me is, to all intents and purposes, somebody else's playground. And I'm just existing in it. It's a very uncomfortable realization to go through. And then, in my case, when I was going through the second waking up process, which was a few years ago, when I realized that this thing I used to have little time for, like Pan-Africanism, anti-imperialism, like, yeah, that's actually those
It.
people I used to laugh at, they were actually onto something. I'm the one who didn't understand how the world worked at all. And why that was such a difficult realization to make at the age of 33 was that at that age, I was already quite a successful mid-career professional. I had won so many journalism prizes locally and internationally. I had gone on a fellowship to the University of Cambridge. I was very accomplished. And at the height of that accomplishment, you have this horrible realization that everything you thought you knew is a lie. So then you're now faced with a choice. Do I turn my back on this accomplishment that I have and all the potential, obviously like financial
Because it's expensive.
that could come with it, am I willing to walk away from this brand that I've built? Am I willing to basically become a child again, like relearn the world? Am I willing to do that? And if you are not able to conquer your own ego, you will never make the right decision. If you're not able to conquer your own ego, you almost certainly just end up you know the truth. And I know many people like this. You know that something else entirely is happening in the world, but you decide intentionally not to know. Even if you are so intellectually curious that you end up knowing, you keep up the pretense of the current space that you're in. I know people like that. I cannot name their names, obviously, but I know people, including people I'm friends with till today, who are living a sort of intellectual double life, where they know that this system that they're part of, this NGO civil society space that they're involved in, this thing is a foreign psyop. And this thing is it's not in our interest as African people. They know. But at the end of the day, who else is going to, at this age that I've got to, I have a wife, I have children, who else is going to pay me $60,000 a year? How else am I going to be able to afford my wife's Pilates class in Karen? So just kind of resigned to the system. I'm thankful that when I was 33, I didn't have like maybe kids and a wife at the time. So maybe that was part of the reason why I found it easier to basically start all over again. Maybe if I had all these responsibilities and encumbrances, I don't know, which is why I don't judge people. Maybe I'd have made a different decision. I don't know. But again, you have to conquer your ego. I had to conquer my ego because I'm telling you, my ego took a lot of conquering. This process didn't take place over a matter of days or weeks. It took close to a year. Like before I first even countenanced the idea of reading Karl Marx, for example. Because you wouldn't believe the first time I opened a Karl Marx text was in 2024. Like I went through a whole education. I was considered to be a very educated person. And at no point, I studied economics at A level and I got an A. And at no point did we ever learn about anything else except capitalism is great and capitalism equals to democracy, which is a completely silly idea, by the way, but that's what we were taught. And so in 2024, for the first time, that I allowed myself, after years of just absolutely talking down my nose at these people whom I just had no time for, I allowed myself to start examining alternative viewpoints. And I realized that everything I thought I knew about those viewpoints was what somebody told me. So, for example, what is communism? I literally had no idea. I thought I had this idea of communism. Communism means Kim Jong Un forcing you to have a particular haircut. You know, yeah, that's the picture that came to my mind. Like,
Yeah.
everybody works like robots. There's no individual expression. Nobody owns anything. Like, it's just horrible society. And then you come to find out that that's not what communism means at all. Communism simply means that the means of production in a society are generally owned. You can still have private ownership. Like, China is a communist society, but people own their own homes, they own their own property. Nothing is probably like the state is the public. So the state owns certain institutions, and the state makes sure that even when certain services are not profitable, they're not run with a profit incentive. So the state deliberately subsidizes certain things. That is what socialism is. But we're not taught this in school.
Mm-mm.
And it's at the ripe old age of 33 that I had to start learning things I should have learned when I was 12. So if you're not able to conquer your ego at that age, you think I'm 30, I have accomplished everything I've accomplished in this life. I've gotten to this point. I refuse to accept the notion that I don't know something.
But there's a way in which, especially the Anglophone, I don't know about the Francophone, but you even said it, there's a way we are taught to overrate ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah,
That
that
also
the
doesn't
school
help.
system does
That
that.
definitely doesn't help.
Yeah.
That doesn't help. And in Nigeria, that is magnified by a factor of 2 or 3 because we already have our own local indigenous issues with overconfidence.
Mm.
So that is so again, which is why I said my ego took a lot of beating. Like it took a lot of conquering for me because as recently as a funny story, as recently as December 2023, I was on a podcast like this with Magat Wade of all people. I was on her podcast. It's still on YouTube. I'm completely ashamed of it now, but it's still there. December 2023, you can Google it. And we're discussing like why Africa is not growing economically. And I'm there as recently as December 2023 saying things like, the problem is not capitalism. The problem is the type of capitalism that they're practicing, crony capitalism. You know?
By the way, I watched it before we had our first conversation. Then I was wondering, by that time you had changed, but I was still in there.
At the time when I gave that interview, I was still very much in the middle of my mental transition, still very much in the middle of it. And it wasn't until maybe 6 months later that I first opened the mouth for the first time. And you know, when you realize that everything you've been told is just not true, and you have this, your heart just sinks. Like, oh no. Because it's not just that podcast. I've given 2 TED Talks before. And one thing I'm grateful for is that they're both very, very obscure. They never received much visibility. I'm very grateful for that because what I said in those TED Talks, I'm like, I look at it now and I'm like, it's like I'm looking at a different person. I'm thinking, how dumb are you? Because the things I was saying things like Africans need to stop obsessing over their minerals. African minerals are not really that important to the world anyway. That African minerals can be replaced by Australian or Chinese, whatever. So that basically the Africa should go and learn how to code and stop crying about white people. That was essentially like the gist of 2 different TED Talks that I gave between 2020 and 2022. Because again, that was the mental space that I lived in at the time because I thought I knew what I thought I knew. And this transition, when it really began, was when, you know, as I said, I was in my personal agency era where I thought, you know, Africans taking personal agency, stop crying over white people, so you can do anything. So that was when I had taken the 6 US government agencies to court. over the Nigerian president's drug cases because I was trying to get full public disclosure. And I believed very naively that, of course, the US system, I didn't understand that a system only works because the people who are in power let it work. I, for some reason, thought the US system is this overarching thing. Without context, again, it's just a system. So anybody that interacts with it in the right way will get the results because the founding fathers created this perfect system that supersedes everything. And then I came to interact with this system and I realized it's like I'm dealing with the Nigerian court system here. There's no difference. They're lying in court. The judge is playing dumb. It's the same nonsense. But I thought these people I thought this was supposed to be a better system. I thought these were Americans. I thought, land of the free, home of the brave. Why are they protecting the Nigerian criminal and saying that it's in the national security interest to do so? I know they used to do stuff like that in the Cold War, but I thought all that stuff ended when the Soviet Union fell. And I thought the excuse was that it was the Cold War. Why are they doing this to some, underdeveloped African country? What is going on here? And that was like little by little, your mind you start to realize, oh shit. That Cold War world never ended in 1989.
No, it didn't. It did not end.
They were very successful at selling the idea to everyone that history ended in 1989.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm guessing that's even why that horrible book became that popular. That was Francis Fukuyama, The End of History. That famous book, I think published in 89, where he said we've reached the end of history, liberal democracy and capitalism have won, and that humanity has basically reached a singularity. Now, it was a very popular book by the so-called historian Francis Fukuyama, who incidentally came out last year and then admitted that he was wrong. That history actually did not end with the fall of the Soviet Union. So again, defeating your ego, I've noticed that a lot of Africans, even though Africans claim to be humble people, a lot of Africans are not humble at all.
No.
In any meaningful sense. So defeating your own ego, which I think is the ultimate humility, I don't think most people will be able to accomplish that. I know how difficult it was for me.
But I think, at least from the school system perspective, I think we are set up to think like that because especially when people reach PhD level, you cannot question them. And then you're like, but you should have realized by now how little you know. But, I think for me, just to finish off our discussion of the documentary, the part I found a bit sad was you were telling me, because I wondered, us at least in Kenya, we are told how Tanzanians have their act together, they are ideologically, how were they caught off guard by this? I thought this is something it would be easier for them to pick than for Kenyans.
Exactly, but what I also learned from my trip to Tanzania is that their so-called ideological self-containment is very oversold. It's very, very oversold.
What we are saying about the way we are oversold as Africans.
Yeah. Their information system, especially their online. I mean, it's not really possible to build a wall on the internet, right? Except maybe you do it like the Chinese style golden shield system, which requires a lot of resources, which they don't have. Their resilience against this sort of information attacks is highly oversold. And the Tanzanian people's sort of political awareness or consciousness is also very oversold. What I learned from my time there is that they're, to a large extent, I wouldn't say they're as propagandized as the rest of us, and they strike me as, pardon me for saying this, very naive people. So they strike me as a population that is just ripe for exploitation if the right defensive measures are not taken. That's how they strike me. So even where a state has the capacity to push back in the information space or to prevent certain information from infiltrating its country, it's not enough to do that. The state also has to invest in alternative information. I don't think the Tanzanian state has done anything close to enough. I spoke to a couple of people in government, and their response was basically, we didn't take it seriously and we didn't see it coming. Basically, that was just it. Like, they saw all the TikTok lives and the Twitter lives and all the noise that was being made and how people were sounding so angry, and there's no way they wouldn't have known also about the money that was flowing, because a lot of this was even on public record. Like, you can go on the internet, go to the Ford Foundation website and see the money flowing to all these Kenyan and Tanzanian actors. So it wasn't a secret, but for some reason, like maybe because they feel like they've survived things like this many times, so they just felt like, oh yeah, this is just another. They'll make some noise, and everything within 48 hours of the election, everybody will move on. I don't think they expected that these people would actually go this far this time around. I think what they're yet to understand is that in the Trump world that we're living in, all bets are off now.
Yeah.
Right. For decades, the US has wanted to bomb Iran. It's Trump that did it. Right. For decades, Israel has wanted to basically annex the whole of Gaza. It's under Trump that it's finally happening, because they are annexing. There's like, as at October 7, 2023, like half of what used to be known as Gaza is no longer, like, they've annexed it, and they've rolled in their bulldozers, they're already building new settlements. So Trump is the wild card as far as the Western Empire goes. Trump is the guy who gives he gives a blank check to the intelligence and military people to do whatever they want, which was why the system allowed Trump to come back, by the way. They feel that their empire is critically endangered, which it is, that the economic supremacy of China and the military rise of Russia makes it inevitable that if they don't do something major, they're going to lose their empire. So they're making a huge play across the world. And East Africa is, it's an integral part of their strategy. I've explained this several times before, that first of all, there's the resources coming from DR Congo, which those critical minerals from DR Congo and Zambia, and even a lot of people don't know this, Tanzania has almost as much resource endowment as DR Congo. It's just that those resources are left in the ground, thankfully. But the idea is that currently those resources are flowing to the Indian Ocean via Dar es Salaam, which gives China preferential access to them. The US is constructing the Lobito Railway Corridor to the west to take them to the Atlantic, direct to the US. So to make the Lobito Railway the default route for minerals coming out of DRC and Zambia, the Tanzanian standard gauge railway, Tanzanian infrastructure in general, even Tanzanian economy need to be destroyed. Tanzania is, just by the accident of its location, Tanzania is an enemy to the Americans right now. And I don't think they've realized that yet, even up till now. And then obviously also by virtue of its geography and its location along the east coast of Africa,
it has a long coast compared to Kenya's.
Yeah. The Gulf of Aden is now obviously a very important, strategically important coastline, because the presence of Yemen along that coast, and to a lesser extent Somalia, which are both hostile, makes it important for them to have military presence along the coast. So they want to have a military presence in Dar es Salaam. They already have a military presence in Mombasa. The French have a military presence in Mombasa. That's not by accident. Everybody's trying to set up military presence along the east and the Horn of Africa. It's also linked to the project they have ongoing in South Africa, the so-called Cape Independence Project. The idea is that Iran's win in the Strait of Hormuz and the presence of Yemen in the Gulf of Aden might create a situation where all future trade between Asia and North America / Europe might have to go via the Cape of Africa. So that shipping route is being secured. So part of that process of securing that shipping route is to take Tanzania and take South Africa, or at least the Western Cape of South Africa. They already have Angola by proxy. It's already in their pockets, and they already have Nigeria on the western coast, and to a lesser extent Ghana as well. So there's a huge geopolitical game being played, and I don't think the Tanzanian establishment recognizes this. It's their job to recognize it, but I don't think they would. I honestly don't think they do. I think they have this weird idea that they're just a country that is developing, and if they are friendly with everybody, then everybody will leave them alone. It's a very silly idea, but it's an idea that I've run into so many times across the continent where people don't understand that there's a wider context to everything. Just because you don't consider someone to be your enemy doesn't mean that they don't consider you
to be
an obstacle. So that's my impression of Tanzania. They have a lot of things going well for them, but the level of political awareness is critically low. I think an urgent intervention needs to be made in their educational system, and even I think in their mainstream politics. I think the ruling party is maybe too comfortable. I think because they've been in power since the country was formed, so they don't really envision a scenario where they lose power due to being sort of violently removed. But that could have happened if things had gone a different way in November. It could have happened, right? Because if you recall, part of what was done in November was to try and get the military to rise up against the government. That attempt would be, if you recall, a certain Captain Kesha, that video was going on. That was part of that project, right? It was to create the impression that the military itself is not united, to create fear and doubt within the ranks of the military. They also tried, obviously, to split off the Tanganyika and Zanzibar, which they're still trying to do, to sow chaos and doubt within the ranks of the military, to potentially create ethnic and religious discord within the military. Because once that happens,
that just annoyed me. It completely
annoyed it was an attempted coup, right? It didn't succeed, but it doesn't mean they're not going to try again.
Yeah.
What was an attempted coup. So I think even up till now, the full seriousness of the situation that they're facing, I don't think they fully comprehend it yet. Because even up to now, I was there a few weeks ago, and I was having conversations with people who are in and around power. Then they're still talking about how they want to pursue a foreign policy of being non-aligned. They want to maintain friendly relations with everybody.
Yeah.
The person they just try to kill you. You're talking about maintaining friendly relations with everybody. You should be in Beijing and in Moscow right now. Everything that can be signed in Beijing and Moscow, you should be signing it right now. That's how you secure your own survival. Because they will kill you. They will kill you. The Americans will kill you. You will die. Obviously, I couldn't say this to them. But I just
non-aligned. That's what is Kenya's mess, is this non-aligned nonsense. That's why we are so in bed with the West, because we are always saying we are non-aligned.
There's a friend of mine who likes to say that if you are non-aligned, someone will align for you. Someone will choose an alignment for you. And that's what always happens. Because in Kenya, for example,
that's the language of the 60s.
To be fair, I don't think Kenya pretends to be non-aligned anymore. They're now designated as a major non-NATO ally. So I don't think you can call Kenya non-aligned anymore.
Let me tell you, they still talk like that. They still talk that non-aligned thing. That's why Macron was here, because we are not aligned.
Kenya has
it's a dissonance.
Kenya has three different Western military bases.
We've always been saying non-aligned. The US puts up bases. We support Ukraine, but the bureaucrats will still say they are non-aligned. For real. It's a dissonance. I don't understand it.
I don't think even they themselves believe that at this point.
I think they do. I think for them to be aligned, I don't even, in their minds, you see, we are decolonized, we are Mau Mau, we fought, we threw out the British.
Okay,
so I think they think that
aesthetic non-alignment, right?
Yes,
I get it.
Yeah, that's it. It's aesthetic. And Kenyans are so good at talking aesthetics. So for them, they feel that those who are aligned are like maybe the Francophones. Those are the ones who are solidly pro-French. Cote d'Ivoire is pro-French, but us, we are non-aligned. Even when Macron came, he came as a partner, as a friend. We are equals.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Actually,
yeah. Even Ruto said we are equals. We don't want to be dictated to. We just want to negotiate as partners. That's how Kenya talks. And it seems that in a way, Tanzanians think that way. They contrast themselves to us. So they think their non-alignment is more non-aligned than ours. But I think it sounds like our bureaucrats are in the same WhatsApp group. That's how it sounds. Except that them, at least Nyerere made sure that they didn't go the way we went. What? No, that's disappointing because I always held Tanzania as the hope for the region. That these guys.
It is the hope for the region. It absolutely is.
But wow.
As I said, they have a lot of good things going for them. But from my own vantage position, having known what it's like to live inside a lodestar that completely lost its way after 2015, my major lesson was that progress is not linear.
Yeah.
And progress can be reversed. Because I didn't believe that before. I just thought, oh, economy is growing at 7% annually. Like, of course, this is going to continue. Why wouldn't it? You know, until it didn't. And then it shed 60% of its GDP in 10 years, and everybody starts, running everywhere, And then you realize, okay, so progress is not linear after all. And I think that's, before Tanzania gets to that point, I think that's actually why I felt so strongly that I decided to invest personal resources into this documentary. I felt like somebody needs to tell this story. Ironically, to Tanzanians themselves, because I was looking at their local media space and they were just paralyzed, they were frozen. So I felt like maybe someone who is an outsider, who maybe culturally they are not used to confrontation like that.
Yeah,
maybe
they are not.
So maybe somebody who has more of an appetite for confrontation needs to come and tell this story. Maybe because I feel like that's part of the reason why the bad guys win is that these NGO types are trained for confrontation. The Maria Sarungis of this world, the way they engage so robustly and the way they are just unrelenting and so seemingly fearless, they're trained for that. But when the audience sees someone that is relentless like that, their mental defenses get broken down over time. So I thought maybe someone who has a similar spirit but is coming from the other direction needs to come and counteract this. I don't think it's going to be enough, even though we're obviously going to do follow-up stories or whatnot. But I think maybe it has, at the very least, it has stopped a certain part of the narrative from flying as it was before. Because now that there's a counter narrative and that they are scared enough of it that they're under instructions not to engage, to avoid amplifying it. That, for the first time, puts them on the defensive. They've been on the offensive since 2020, actually. So I think for the first time in 6 years, they are now, to an extent, on the defensive. So the onus is now on the Tanzanian state to do something with that, which I don't know if they're going to, but for the sake of their own survival, they're better.
How did you notice that something was off? I mean, what triggered you to ask questions?
So I think it was on the day on November 29, or either November 29 or on November 30. On November 30, when videos started going viral all over African Twitter spaces. There was a video in particular I can't forget. They claimed that it was Tanzanian protesters storming Julius Nyerere International Airport, breaking past the barricades to stop Samia Suluhu Hassan's plane from taking off. That she's trying to escape Tanzania. And even without knowing that this video was fake, it was an old video, I just saw this and I just said, I've seen this exact thing before. Where someone is trying to create the impression that something crazy and unprecedented is happening, because something similar happened in Nigeria as well. Back in 2015. Good luck Jonathan's people, they're all fleeing the country. I think this was on either on election day or the day after. They're all fleeing the country because they know that once the once the new sheriff in town comes in, he's going to arrest all of them for corruption. They're all fleeing, and there was no such thing. Like, I've seen this before. When someone is trying to whip you into this emotional state, I'm always very, very wary of that. Like, especially when I can see the account that posted this. It's not like it's not an account that engages in issues of politics. It's an influencer account. This influencer is obviously from Kenya or from somewhere else. Since when did you become so interested in the Tanzanian people's human rights and politics and whatnot? And so the first thing I did was I researched that video and I realized this video is from 2021. It was from when John Magufuli's body was being flown to Dodoma. And people were breaking past the barricades to get a glance at the body. So that already, as soon as I figured out that this is an old video, I already had it in the back of my mind. This is a classic regime change attempt. Because the first thing you see is the saturation of fake news across social media. What also put me onto that was that particular video, the way it went so super viral, and it was clearly being amplified by Elon Musk's famously non-partisan algorithm. To the point where even Western social media users, like white people, were reposting it, and it was doing numbers. And I'm like, since when do people in the US, can they find Tanzania on a map? Do they know that Tanzania is a country? Like, since when are they so invested? And they're talking about how, that we the people. Since when did they consider them and black people to be we? Where did the we come from? When has there ever been a we? That, we the people are finally standing up to another thing I'm always very wary of is when someone tries to tell me that, so they are a European or an American, I am an African, and then they try to tell me that we're in the same struggle and that we're both struggling against the ruling class. Hello, no,
we're not.
My ruling class and your ruling class are not the same.
Yeah, they are not the same.
Because my ruling class is a proxy to your ruling class. It's a step below. So we're not in the same struggle. And this account, I think his name is on Page or something. It starts talking about how that people are rising across the world. And I'm always very careful of such wording. People have woken up. Because I've heard that in Africa a lot. That, Kenyan youths have woken up. Nigerian youths have woken up. Ghanaian youths have woken up. And each time it's a psyop. So I saw that. And the next thing, this other video, which I also highlighted in the documentary, it was also a Kenyan account. These were all Kenyan accounts. I know Dodoma is basically a brand new city. But this video I was seeing, the person claimed that this was Dodoma, total breakdown of law and order, police shooting in the air, and the place just looked so really old and dirty. And I'm visually familiar with Dodoma. I know this cannot possibly be Dodoma. This place looks like it was built sometime in the 1940s. There's no way that is Dodoma. And I carefully freeze every frame in the video, and then I see a signboard in the background that says +243.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
This is, and then I find some other visual markers. This is Lumumbashi in DR Congo. This is not Dodoma. And again, that video is going super viral. Then I see another video. They say they claim that it's Tanzanians marching through the streets, fighting against their corrupt officials or whatnot. First of all, that street looks very, I'm a bit familiar with Dar es Salaam. I know the CBD looks a bit nice, but that is not what Dar es Salaam looks like. There's no place like this in Dar es Salaam. And then I noticed that there's a guy who is holding like a staff and wearing like a Zulu outfit.
I think I saw that one and I wondered.
Yeah, and then I look closer and there's a mall and you see Durban. It's like, okay, this is from South Africa. And then the question starts, so who is so invested in pushing out fake news and why? And there's so much more of this fake news. Then the next day you see a supposed quote from Paul Kagame, completely fictitious.
Yeah, that one I knew. Even reading it, I knew, no, Kagame can't say something like this.
And I just went down the rabbit hole. Okay, so who came up with this quote? Because there was it came from like a Facebook page. So the picture I saw on Twitter, I put it into Google reverse image search. The original source was a Facebook page. I went there, and it's a Facebook page that calls itself 7 News. It has over 1 million followers. It's supposedly this US news channel. And I dig a bit closer and I realize this is not the actual 7 News from the US. This is a fraudster. And a little bit of open source sleuthing, and it turns out the entity behind it is some young Kenyan guy, Zephaniah Captum. The company is called Mastered Cash. And I actually confronted him. I found his Twitter handle. I confronted him on Twitter, like, what are you doing? Like, what is all this fake news coming out of your organization? And the guy starts taunting me, and then I realized, oh, this is a paid influencer gig, because that's how influencers behave when you catch them in a gig. So who is paying influencers to act like something is happening? We've all heard that, okay, they're killing protesters in Tanzania or whatnot. Is it not enough for us to hear it or for us to see the photos and videos from there? Why are you showing us fake news? Because if this thing is really happening on its own, that would be strong enough. Yeah. So who is pushing, who feels the need to put a bit of gas behind it and add fake news? And that's where all the alarm bells start to ring. I've never publicly revealed this before. We had a huge in-house fight over it. Massive. We've never had a quarrel like that ever since. Because we used to have a team member, and she was from this classic NGO activism space, right? But even though this is like, so the spearhead is like fully anti-imperialist Pan-Africanist, but the reason she was hired is because we were under the impression that we're ideologically aligned. This is someone who, she wears a keffiyeh to work. She's all about that. Free Palestine. She has spent some time in Israel, so she's very, very radicalized, anti-Israel. So obviously, if you're anti-Israel, you're anti-imperialist. If you're anti-imperialist, you would understand the premise for being Pan-Africanist. We didn't think there was any ideological confusion there. Come to find out, she's all about how, oh no, that even if this is a color revolution, it doesn't matter, that they have no business killing Tanzanian people. Why are they killing the people? That Sulu Samia is a dictator, this, that, the other. And once people start using terms like dictator and despot, because those two words, especially the word dictator, is one of those weaponized words in existence. Once you hear that someone is a dictator, if you think about it, the dictionary definition of dictator doesn't in and of itself connote anything negative. A dictator is one who dictates.
Oh yeah, yes, yeah.
But that word has been so weaponized. When you hear someone is a dictator, you're instantly thinking of Adolf Hitler. You are thinking of like the worst possible. When you think of a dictator, you are not thinking of Lee Kuan Yew, who was a dictator, right? You're not thinking of the current king of the UAE, who is a dictator, who is not subject to any election whatsoever. You're not thinking of the king of Saudi Arabia, or the king of Bahrain or Jordan or anything like that. What you are thinking of is the names that have been put into your head. Idi
Amin.
Yeah, that's a dictator. So once you start using terms like that, I'm very careful. Even at the spearhead, we actually have a newsroom policy against it. We avoid using terms like that as much as possible. Even for people we don't like, we avoid using terms like that because the term is a poison term. And this lady who was on the team, she felt very strongly about it. I tried to sort of contain the disagreement, but it wouldn't be contained because other people on the team just weren't having it. And it turned into a huge
And they felt bullied. Usually these people, they bully. They bully with morality.
Exactly.
They make you feel like you support bloodshed.
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah, that's what they do. It's so East African.
That's exactly what happened, right? Oh, that you are running away from oppression in your own homeland. How can you support oppression in someone else's homeland? Yeah.
That's
so even in-house it caused a massive blowout. And then we actually initially did a story on it back in December, but nobody watched it, where we actually outlined the origins of the so-called Chadema, the opposition party. But nobody watched it because at the time we thought that, okay, we'll just do what we can here, which is a story showing that this supposed opposition party is not an entity to be taken seriously. We did that story, it didn't go far. And I just felt like we hadn't done justice to this topic. Because again, the reason I feel so personally about this is because I lived through this and it's ruined my life as I had it there. I was fortunate enough that I came from the kind of family that, and I had the kind of educational background that allowed me to find my way in another way. But it absolutely ruined my life and the lives of millions of people at the time. And I could see the same thing happening all over again. And when the opportunity came in February, because as you know, getting into Tanzania, if you're not an East African passport holder, it's not the easiest thing in the world because I'm Nigerian, so that adds a further layer of complexity. You have to
Oh
get a
yeah.
visa. So there was a whole lot of back and forth and forth and back, and I had to explain what I want to do in Tanzania. And that was fun. Not really. Before eventually I was able to get in. This was late January, early February. Do my interviews, do some filming, film some footage, and then from there we went to Nairobi. That's where we did some filming there before we went back to Accra. We had to fact check a whole bunch of stuff because we knew that this kind of documentary, when you put it out, if there's even one mistake, just
Oh,
one,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And eventually they did find one. It was very minor, so minor that it was almost comical, but they did find one. Jeffrey Smith, who was mentioned in the documentary, the picture that was used was the wrong Jeffrey Smith. So that was it. So there's another person called Jeffrey Smith who looks like this Jeffrey Smith, and the video
Mm.
editor used the wrong picture. That's all. But even that, they found it and said, "Well, if you couldn't use the correct picture of me, then how can we trust anything?" You know, the usual stuff. They tried to play that card.
All right. Well, maybe we can go to South Africa. You're up for it?
Hmm. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. What's actually at stake here? Because I think everyone agrees it's not really immigration, but what's at stake?
So as I kind of already mentioned, South Africa, just by virtue of its location, is strategically important. Specifically,
Mm.
the Cape of South Africa is very important. So in this brave new Trump world that we live in, some people are
Mm.
making the calculation that basically South Africa, in its current iteration, is an obstacle for a number of reasons. I'm sure you've seen that famous Times of Israel article, which is flying everywhere now, where the guy says Africa must fragment South Africa first.
What?
So the goal is,
Uh,
oh, you haven't seen it?
I think I saw the headline, but I didn't read the article.
You should read it. The article is worse than the headline. It's basically saying it whole heart that all these separatist movements across Africa must be supported. Africa should be fragmented even further, and that should start with South Africa, and that Israel must provide support to all these projects to fragment South Africa. That's how to secure Israel's future.
That is so
Yeah,
evil.
yeah, that's the reality of empire. You know, imperialists. That's what imperialism is. So some people have looked at the map of Africa and have decided that um, there's Biafran separatism in Nigeria, which they obviously fund and incubate. There's every geographically major African country has. So there's Azawad separatism in Mali. I'm sure they have a
Mm.
hand in that as well. There's what's it called? There's Cabinda separatism in Angola. There's I don't know if the Katanga separatists still exist, but there's M23 and all sorts of things like that in DRC. They're trying to stoke separatism now in Tanzania between Tanganyika and Zanzibar, which never existed before. Kenya has largely escaped because Kenya is basically their huge mothership on the African continent. And then there's South Africa, Western Cape independence, and all this. So their strategy is that to fragment South Africa first, and to do so without triggering the requisite backlash that such a thing would normally generate from South Africa and from across the continent. South Africa first has to be set up as an enemy to the rest of the continent. So
Oh.
go out, use the very worst of the South African public space. Take their very worst people, give them funding, and turn them into like basically make South Africa the most disliked country on the continent. Put funding behind these people. Tell them the worst bigotries and nativisms that you can find in South Africa. Amplify these things, turn them into a national movement. Right? It doesn't. National movement doesn't have to be well thought out. It doesn't even need to have a name that makes sense. Which I mean, March and March. What does that even mean exactly? Um, just do something, make it loud, and then we, as the funding entities, will make sure that it is on every newspaper, it is on every TV channel, it's on every timeline, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram.
And the bots,
You can't
the way
escape
they
it.
hound you.
You can't escape it.
They
Even if
come.
even if you have no interest in South Africa, you've never been to South Africa before, you are not interested in South Africa and its internal politics, you cannot escape it. It's on the radio, it's on the internet, it's on TV, it's offline, it's everywhere. So, and how I can gauge how successful this thing has been is that here in Ghana, the political culture in Ghana here is relatively passive. Ghanaians are quite similar to Tanzanians in that respect. Ghanaians are not the type who will go out onto the streets and very laid back, very chilled out people, right? Very pleasurable to be around, right? Now, all of a sudden, you see Ghanaians going to demonstrate in front of the MTN office in Accra, talking about the Ghanaian government should expel MTN from Ghana. Ghanaians don't do that. It's either of two things. Either this thing has been so well promoted that even these people who are normally passive have finally been radicalized to think that South Africa is now treating Ghana as an enemy and that then the Ghanaian government should retaliate. And there's an element of truth in that because, again, the decision to go after Ghanaian immigrants was just incomprehensible. Why would you go after Ghanaian immigrants? First of all, how many Ghanaian immigrants live in South Africa? They're not many. Secondly, Ghanaians are probably, of all the Africans who are visibly known across the continent, Ghanaians are probably the most universally liked.
That's
Nobody
why.
has a problem with Ghanaians.
But that's why.
So, exactly.
That
So,
moral standing of Ghana that is they go for it.
So you go and you very publicly make an enemy out of Ghana. The Ghanaian government has to charter jets to evacuate its citizens. Its citizens are pictured on the jet home waving the Ghanaian flag and singing their anthem. Like it's such a PR disaster from a South African point of view, right? So are these protesters that dumb? Is the South African establishment that stupid, or is somebody intentionally curating the sequence of events to make South Africa even more disliked than it already is? And then parallel to this, they're going after even South African citizens who are not from ethnic majorities. So they're going after like Songas and Venda people and calling them Kweri. And then those videos are flying everywhere. If you go, how I know these videos are absolutely flying everywhere is that, so the Spearhead has a Facebook page. I don't normally use Facebook. Like we just have a Facebook page because we can't not have a Facebook page, right? And there was a video we did. It's like it's what we call a clean video, where it's basically like a video that exists from another source, and we just take it and like repurpose it, right? And it was one of these March and March people saying something very stupid, and we just posted it randomly and came back 2 days later. That video had 197,000 likes, like 8 million views. Why is it getting 8 million views? We didn't put any budget behind it. Just a video we put there. Well, it's just flying. Why? So from someone who has an inside view, I can tell that even the social media algorithms are intentionally boosting certain types of content. They're intentionally boosting certain types of content, and it makes sense when you consider who owns these algorithms, who owns these platforms. I mean, Elon Musk, famously, we know that. But even Facebook, who owns Facebook? Who runs TikTok USA? It's Larry Ellison, the largest private donor to the IDF. There are all sorts of interests that are enmeshed and intertwined here. And unfortunately, the ultimate victim here won't even be the immigrants in South Africa. The ultimate victims will be South Africans themselves, Black South Africans. They will be the victims because when this project reaches its fruition, it hasn't reached its fruition, by the way, thankfully. I think there was enough pushback, even from within South Africa, that they weren't able to successfully portray the entirety of South Africa as this singular entity that must be excommunicated from the rest of the continent, because that's what they were trying to accomplish, right? And just
that's why they were insulting us. Whenever an African asks, you just see a trail of insults.
It was deliberate. It was deliberate. A lot of those things were bots. They were not authentic accounts.
I figured. It
was deliberate. They're trying to drive. There's already a rift between South Africa and the rest of Africa, but they're trying to turn that rift into a chasm. Such that once that is accomplished, once it gets to the point where people are recalling their ambassadors from South Africa and long-standing economic relationships are being torn apart, maybe people are kicking out MTN, all that kind of stuff is happening. Then at that point, after successfully driving that division between South Africa and the rest of Africa, we will then hear that some separatist entity has started taking armed action against the South African state. And we'll then find out probably some of these entities have already been covertly armed. If you recall, or you might not recall this, sometime last year, it was revealed that the office of the First Lady of the US had been sending Starlink kits to Orania under the official seal of the US First Lady. Bear in mind, Starlink is illegal in South Africa. And Starlink communication is basically not, it can't be monitored by the South African government. So that was basically an act of war, sending equipment to a separatist enclave. You probably haven't seen this, but I'll just read it out. This happened literally this morning. The US ambassador to South Africa, Brent Bozell, put out this tweet. Great to see Afrikaner leaders from the Solidarity Movement, AfriForum, Solidarity, SAAI, NEASA, and Freedom Front Plus. We discussed how the US government's focus on the community can contribute to a safer and more prosperous South Africa. So this guy is openly meeting with white separatists.
And he's using black language. That's black language. Solidarity, community.
Yes. So yeah, that's what's going on. They're trying to split South Africa as part of their strategy for controlling international trading routes. And this Jacinta and the other clown are just tools who probably don't realize that they're just tools. They probably think they're a lot more important than they actually are.
Africa is so vulnerable in ways that is just annoying. We're so vulnerable. Because even why are they getting all these interviews and being interviewed like they're saying something very logical?
You know, a couple of days ago, she was on. I mean, I'm not going to make an accusation here, but what I will say is that getting an interview slot on primetime Nigerian radio in Lagos is usually a paid thing. It's usually either you are literally a celebrity from the US coming into town and they want to interview you, or you're paying for it. Now, this Jacinta lady, was on primetime Nigerian radio a couple of days ago, and I'm thinking to myself, why is Jacinta Ngobese on primetime Nigerian radio? Because apart from the fact that it's very difficult to get onto it unless you are paying for it, which would then raise the question, who is paying for it? The other question is, why specifically Nigerian radio? Radio in the country where she's most disliked.
It's that provocation and
exactly.
It's a provocation, but also that idea, they know Africans will say, oh, let's respect her right to speak, like it's an academic conversation.
And that's exactly what happened. Because she went on there and she basically insulted Nigerians. Basically.
And she was let to do it.
Yes.
No, Africans need to start getting some bottom lines. We need to start drawing some red lines and saying there are some things which we wouldn't even entertained.
You would think. You would think.
People don't mind being insulted in their own country. No, I think
Again, I guess from the
Africans
radio station's point of view, it's well,
objective.
we're giving everybody
An equal
right of
chance to speak.
yeah. Which is some, by the way, which is some of the pushback that I used to get a lot when I was doing like written long form journalism. That yes, we know you've done all this research and you have all this evidence and we know this is true, but why didn't you give the other person the chance to respond? You know, like
I hate that line. Oh dear Lord, I hate it. I hate it so much.
oh man.
And usually the person who you're being told to give a chance to give a rebuttal has the whole state media for them and the whole mainstream media. But oh, you have discriminated against them because you did not give them space to talk.
Exactly.
Ah,
you have discriminated against if a white guy is racist to you and you push back on it, then you are being disrespectful to him.
That happened to me a few years ago. I was in a book launch by my friend Ogada, and some guy started saying, oh, you know, African women, you people get so many babies because...
What?
Yes, he told... In fact, Macron was nothing. What Macron was scolding, that's nothing. That's why I didn't even say anything. This one, he told us, you African women, you get many babies because Western medicine helped you. You always used to have babies, but they would die off. Now, because of Western medicine, you are...
What?
I stood up. I stood up and said, no, you cannot tell us that. I said, you cannot tell us that in our own country. No. And then after the meeting, people came after me and said, why didn't you let him speak? Were you not suppressing his rights? Yes, Kenyans. Were you not suppressing his right to speak?
Oh my God.
There was a Mzungu woman behind me who told me, oh, talk about freedom of speech. I said, yeah, racism doesn't have freedom of speech here. But after that, when the meeting was over, Kenyans came to me and said I should have given him the right to speak, like it's something I give, and that maybe he had a point. Maybe I could have listened. I don't know why people think taking abuse is noble. Maybe it's Christianity also.
Maybe.
Yeah, you know, we are told Jesus did a great thing by having himself crucified. So even us, we must be crucified, then we'll be nice and holy.
Forgive 7 times, turn the other cheek.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, no, I think there are some red lines we must not accept. And maybe that's the first thing out of this war on us. We must say that there are some lines that we cannot accept. But that's very hard for Africans because we want to be good. Wow, we've been at it for so long, but we need to finish with Traore and Goita.
Right.
Yeah, the stories, because I think they are fighting the stories. There's a way, I mean, okay, maybe it's because I'm following them on my social media feeds, but they seem to be invested in getting out their stories.
Well, it's definitely better now than it was a couple of years ago, but I still feel it's not enough.
Yeah.
I think where they're especially failing is that the media investments that they're making are made primarily in French-speaking media. I think they need to be focused a lot more on English-speaking. Like it or not, the center of the world is English. The center of the geopolitical world and the economic world is English-speaking. That's just the reality. So their narrative in the English-speaking world is still being controlled to a very large extent by the Reuters and the usual players, right? Obviously, there's smaller players like us and others in the social media space, but there's only so much that we can do, and people wouldn't normally cite something like the Spearhead as a conventional news source. We have our own. There's a niche we exist in, and it's not the same niche as someone like Bloomberg or something. So I feel like we're doing a lot more in that respect. They recently inaugurated a new radio and TV station, but it's French language again.
Mm.
I feel like they're making it. They're missing a trick strategically by doing that. And then on social media, I guess they've made a bit of an effort, but again, a lot of that effort is French based.
Mm.
There needs to be a lot more English language pushback because most of the narrative, the attempts to discredit the narrative, they're coming from English speaking media.
Mm.
Within the French speaking space, one funny thing I've come to realize over the past few months is that within the French speaking space, everybody actually knows what the deal is, and everybody has already picked a side. Like there's no battle for hearts and minds in the French speaking space. Everybody already knows I'm an imperialist or the French are imperialists. Everybody already knows. And that's even in Africa. In Africa, they've chosen their sides. I'm on the side of the French or I'm against the French. Everybody knows what it is. There's actually a lot more political awareness there than people like me that are giving them credit for. It's in the English-speaking space that there's a battle of ideas.
Which it shouldn't be. I mean, why can't we just pick a side? But you see, that's part of the warfare. We're not allowed to pick a side, or at least the side we want.
So I think that's where they need to do some work. I mean, they've done a bit of work. It's not like it was a couple of years ago where their narrative was completely at the mercy of Twitter users. It's better now, but there's still quite a bit of work to do. And going beyond just in the narrative warfare, I think those of us in the so-called, I hate using the term leftist because it's a meaningless term, but those of us who consider ourselves to be anti-imperialist, I think could probably also give them a bit of grace. I've noticed that I think even I have been guilty of this before. Because there is revolutionary leadership in the AES and because there's improvement of material realities on the ground and because certain things we've always hoped for are being done, we get carried away with ourselves and we start expecting them to perform miracles that are not on the menu. So there was a time, as recently as last year, I used to say stuff like, I hope they involve themselves in revolutionary movements elsewhere on the continent. But knowing what I know now, I realize that they're far away from doing that. They're still a good, at least half decade away from having that capacity. They've not, like, with all due respect, of the three of them, only Burkina Faso has achieved food security, like food sovereignty. If you've not achieved food sovereignty yet, you have no business going around the continent being an adventurist. You have to first ring fence your home first. You have to give things a certain baseline first before you can venture beyond your borders. And I'm saying this because the recent furore surrounding the visits from the Israeli ambassador and how some people got so upset. Why are you shaking hands with an Israeli diplomat? He's a Zionist. Are you exchanging France for Israel? We thought you were revolutionary. How can you betray us by shaking hands with the Zionists? You're shaking hands with an Israeli ambassador when you are claiming to be blah, blah, blah. And it's like the post of Israeli ambassador who is just accredited to Burkina Faso is actually Israeli ambassador to Cote d'Ivoire and is accredited to Burkina Faso for consular purposes. That post has existed in 1993 when Ibrahim Traore was 5 years old. You do not expect Ibrahim Traore to come in and with Burkina Faso that hasn't completely finished reclaiming all of its territory from terrorists yet, then say, I am picking a fight with Israel. It doesn't make any sense. He has to pick his battles. He has to be pragmatic. One day, the time will come when you are strong enough to break off diplomatic ties with Israel. But I think a lot of us in this space, we love spectacle a lot.
By the way,
You were saying?
I got that feeling that we have to be careful of the Western left, because they love spectacle. They love resistance, what do you call, press statements, clash with the
Mm-hmm.
police,
Yeah,
persecution by government. And yet, actually, most of the work that we have to do is in the mind. That's Africa's
yeah,
weakness. So we have to be very careful. Many of them are well-meaning and their hearts are in the right place, but their push for spectacle is quite dangerous.
exactly. So they they want him. Oh, you wear Thomas
Mm.
Sankara's red beret. So they want him to go give revolutionary speeches at the UN, and you know, yeah, those things are great. But at the end
Mm.
of the day, Sankara ended up dead.
Yeah.
His, his death did not help the material conditions of Burkina Faso.
Mm.
So if Ibrahim Traore ends up dead, that doesn't help us. We don't need more dead heroes. We have enough.
Yeah. We have many. We have many.
We have we have too many dead heroes. We don't need one more. So again, it's all well and good because he always says the homeland or death. And my pushback is always, it's great if you die for your country, but it's better if you live for your country.
Mm.
So I just thought I would drop that in because I've been seeing a lot of the internet crash outs that a lot of people have been having because he shook hands with an Israeli, and it's like you people cannot seriously expect him to be taking on that level of fight when people are still dying of malaria in some parts of the country, you know? It has to be one step at a time. Some people
Mm.
want him to go and light himself on fire. Meanwhile, when you look at the revolutionary movements that have actually succeeded, such as the Chinese one or the Iranian one, there's a lot of strategic patience involved,
Yeah.
right? The Chinese ideologically were diametrically opposed to the Americans, diametrically opposed on the other end of the ideological spectrum, and yet made the US the largest single trading partner. Again, when you are in a revolutionary process, there are certain contradictions that are always inherent. It's normal. The same way the Iranians were ideologically opposed to the Americans and were buying weapons from the Americans during the Iran-Contra scandal. They realized that the Americans have a strategic weakness here, which is that they need money because the CIA's budget has been slashed. So the CIA is willing to sell them weapons, black market, and they pay the CIA. The CIA uses the money to fund the rebels in Nicaragua. So even though they had obviously have some sympathy with the left-wing Nicaraguan government, but they know that their own survival comes first. And they made that decision. So why is it that everybody else is allowed to make strategic decisions in their own self-interest? But when it comes to Africa, Ibrahim Traore must go and signpost to the world. Why should he put himself in that situation such that when he ends up dead, then we can say, oh yeah, he was a real one. He was a true
Mm.
Pan-Africanist, or he was a true leftist, or whatever. Who cares if he was a true this or that? I I always refer to the example of Patrice Lumumba as one of the most aggravating stories
Yeah.
I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Like, I don't consider it to be an inspiring story at all. It irritates me every time I
Mm.
hear it because he
Mm.
died a very, very pointless death. He did not have to die.
Yeah, he didn't.
He really didn't have to. He had ample opportunity to request assistance from the Soviet Union. And he said, I don't want the Americans to think I'm a communist. And then he went to the Americans to ask for help against the Katanga uprising that they sponsored. And obviously, they didn't give him the help. And then when it was already too late, when he reached out to the Soviets finally. And at that point, it was already too late. And then the Americans caught him and they dissolved him in acid. And the Belgians kept his tooth. How is that an inspiring story? That's a story of a man who didn't understand strategic alignment. I didn't understand how to get things done. So again, we don't need more dead heroes.
All right. Thank you so much. It has been a marathon. Maybe we should be
Yeah,
meeting more
yeah. It
often.
hasn't it hasn't felt like it, but yeah,
Yeah, so that we can, but maybe the last thing you can say is uh, going back to the epistemic warfare. what Africans should think going forward, because this is such a big problem. It's so I'm so bothered. We are so naive. What's
Right.
something that you can leave Africans thinking about, or how to get out of it? Because we are so naive.
I think, well, there isn't really any neat bow that can tie on this because it's such a large topic. But what I would say is that your your ego is an artificial thing. Your ego has been a lot of the time you think it's yours, but somebody actually built it. Somebody has actually given you the idea that you are this thing. And one of the purposes of an ego is to stop you from learning more about it. So one of the best things that you can do for yourself as an African is to be habitually curious, to habitually ask more questions about absolutely everything, including things that you think are settled in your mind, including things that you are sure you know. Whenever you come across new information that challenges those things, don't be afraid to challenge them in your mind. I can say this from experience because for the longest time, I had the impression that I knew everything there was to know about the political economy and the geopolitical world for the longest time. And and I had a lot of trophies and awards and career achievements to prove that I knew what I was talking about. And it was less than 3 years ago that the sort of Saul Saul on the way to Damascus moment happened in my personal life. And it's been very humbling. Um, it's it's been intellectually humbling. It's been morally humbling as well because there's a moral superiority that you feel when you think you know a lot, and then when you realize that you really didn't know as much as you thought you did, and a lot of the time you were talking down on people and you had no idea what you were saying. Like you will suffer a very big ego death, right? But it's only an ego death. It's not a physical death. It doesn't kill you. So allow yourself go through it. I promise it doesn't kill. It's painful, but it doesn't kill, and you'll be better off for it. I think that's the most I can say.
All right, David, thank you so much. I look forward to the next conversation. I won't wait that long so that we can give people a break and not load them with everything. But I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Same here.